This
Stephanie.
conference will now be recorded.
Perfect, Carla. All right, well, I'm going to get going. Thank you for joining us this morning for the Oregon State Board of Ag meeting. Today is Wednesday, May 19th, 2021. I'm Brian Harper, and I am Vice Chair, stepping in for Stephanie Halleck. This meeting is now called to order. I'd like to begin the meeting by asking Carla Balmas to review a few of the housekeeping items for the meeting.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the meeting. Just a reminder to please have your phone or your computer on mute if you are not speaking, so that helps with the background noise. Also, if you are joining the call by video, we would ask that you turn your camera off unless you are a speaker, so that helps with the bandwidth as well. Also, if you would like to see the pre-meeting materials that we have, they're on our website, on the ODA website. The address is oda.direct/board agriculture, all one word. And this meeting is being recorded and will be posted after the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Carla. Time for introductions. Carla, I'm going to ask you to please call the roll for introductions. And we have two new board members, Randy and Chad, and we did have a board introductory meeting for them. And there was just basically Stephanie and I on there, but I thought for sake of not being able to meet in person, not really getting to know each other, might ask Randy and Chad to share a little bit more about themselves, kind of like in the meeting, but also for the other current board members, let's share a little bit more about ourselves to help get them to know who we are. And I guess I'll begin. I'm Brian Harper, as stated earlier. I'm currently vice chair, 5th generation farmer, Junction City. I farm hazelnuts and dug for timber. Been here 5 generations, and we've raised about everything that's been capable of being raised in the South Valley. And I love flying and I love farming. So that's what I pretty much do down here.
Thanks, Brian. Barbara Boyer.
Good morning, everybody. Barbara Boyer is present today. Let's see, I'm a farmer out of McMinnville. I farm, at our max, we were farming 1,000 acres, and now we're down to about 600 acres of grass hay. I sit on the Yamhill Soil Water Conservation District Board. I am the chair of the Soil and Water Conservation Commission. I am the State Board of Ag's rep on the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. And I also sit on the Oregon Ag Heritage Program advisory. And I think that's about it. Welcome everybody.
Shantae Johnson. Elaine Miller.
Hi, I'm Elaine Miller, and I'm a hazelnut farmer and wine grape grower in Umpqua. And I also have the privilege of serving on the Fall Creek Farm and Nursery Board of Directors in the blueberry industry. I also chair the Cultivating New Frontiers in Agriculture, which is a group that does ag development work, helping smallholder farmers, particularly in Africa, but also in Central Asia.
Tyson Raymond.
Yeah, Tyson Raymond. I farm north of Pendleton, about 15 miles, town called Helix. Dryland winter wheat, and then we have a registered Angus program and a commercial cattle herd. And then I also farm my wife's family's place just north of Walla Walla, and that's dryland winter wheat and peas mostly.
Luisa Santa Maria.
Sure. Luisa Santa Maria. I'm an associate professor at Oregon State University, and I'm extension, and I'm representing here a public member.
Looks like Shantae just joined us. We'll go back to Shantae for introduction.
Good morning, everybody. Shantae Johnson, farmer, Corbett, Oregon.
Josh Zielinski. Can't hear you this morning.
It sounds like he's going to call in. Maybe come back to him, Carla.
Yeah. Chad Allen. And Randy Savati.
Hi, Rhonda Savati. My husband and I farm between Ontario and Vail. We raise mostly vegetable and forage seed crops. We are kind of the different farm in that area, and that we don't raise onions, but heavily involved in the onion industry. I'm also the branch manager for Northwestern Credit there in Ontario, and that's about it. I'm happy to be here.
Dean Sams.
Yeah, I'm Alan Sams, Dean of the College of Agricultural Sciences at Oregon State University and Director of the Oregon Agricultural Experiment Station with locations throughout the state.
Director Taylor.
Hi, Alexis Taylor, Director, ODA.
And we'll circle back to Josh. Are you connected yet, Josh? Looks like he's trying to dial in, so we'll see if we can give him a couple seconds. So there's Mr. Allen. Chad Allen, do you want to introduce yourself? Okay, well, we'll give him a chance to get familiar with the software and unmute him. I'd like to invite folks to use the chat box as a sign-in sheet. If you have an opportunity to do that, that would be great. Again, a reminder that board members only with their video cameras on this morning, unless you're invited to give a presentation this morning. And I'll note that we have a public comment period scheduled at 10:30 this morning. So back to you, Brian.
I think I figured it out.
Excellent, Chad. We'll let you introduce yourself. I think you're the last one. Kind of like in the introductory meeting, go ahead and tell the board a little more about yourself, and so we can kind of get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, well, my name's Chad Allen here in dairy in Tillamook. I've been here pretty much my whole life. I'm grown up second generation dairy farmer here now. Just really excited for this opportunity, and I look forward to learning a lot and getting to know all you guys better. Sorry for a little bit of trying to get. I didn't realize I didn't have this video chat app. I got so many of them now. Everyone's a little bit different, so I got another one added to the arsenal now. So good morning.
Glad you made it on. Yeah, I guess a quick reminder, the meeting is being recorded. So anyone who speaks, definitely want to state your name for the record before you begin your comment. It's easy to forget. Someone will probably chime in to remind you. Yeah, from there, we'll move on to approval of the minutes. Assume everybody had a look at the minutes that were sent out by Carla. I guess unless anything stands out to anybody. I'd like to call for a, I guess, a motion to approve the minutes as written.
So move. This is Elin.
All right.
Tyson Raymond, second.
Second. All right. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor of the minutes approved as written, say aye.
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 All right. And any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Okay. Now hand the director's report over there to Director Taylor.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you. So first, I just want to welcome our 2 new board members. We are thrilled to have you on. This is a great board, and we look forward to when we can all get back together in person and really build some of those other personal connections. But thrilled to have a full board once again. Just in time to start the next process to replace our 2 board members who will be coming off later this year. And so we will be sharing information maybe later this summer about restarting that process to look for another producer position when Tyson comes off and a public member for when Stephanie Halleck comes off. So one update I wanted to provide from the program area updates, something that's happened since those program area updates were written and went in. Under the market access and certification program area, we mentioned the ongoing Kentucky 31 investigation, and we were gearing up for the administrative hearing. Since that time, we actually settled that investigation in that case. And we had done a press release, which I believe went to the board, but we could circle back and resend that if you did not see it. It lays out how we settled that case, but just wanted to let you know we are not going to administrative hearing on that case. There is other ongoing investigations around in conjunction with that larger investigation that we had undertook, and so more to come, I think, in under the seed enforcement program, but just really wanted to acknowledge and thank our staff in the seed program who put in a lot of work over the past kind of year and a half to bring that investigation to completion. When we last met, we were gearing up we're just at the beginning of the legislative session. Now we're coming towards the end. Last month we had our budget hearing, which went well, and now we're just in a little bit of a waiting pattern on budget. The May revenue forecast comes out this afternoon, and that's really the piece that's needed for the legislature to really start in on kind of finalizing budgets and figure out that larger framework. And so we'll be glad when that comes out this afternoon, and the legislature will start really pivoting and spending a lot of time focused on agency budgets. I know Lauren and Jonathan, I believe, are going to take over the legislative update, member from Lisa, because she has a conflict, but just a couple things. It's been really busy the past couple weeks for us as an agency. I actually presented yesterday at a pesticide hearing in House Ag. The week before, we presented before House Ag on organic agriculture. And then next week we have one, just a general Ag 101, and one around climate change, agriculture, and carbon sequestration. So a busy kind of time period for presentations before the legislature. Also on climate change, I just wanted to flag that ODA, OWEB, and ODF joined some comments that we submitted to USDA. They had a request for information out, and so we had compiled some comments and submitted them around where does agriculture and forestry, how can we support that sector as we work to adapt and mitigate to climate change, what kind of resources are needed out there, what kind of support, and we will share those with the board after this meeting, so you can see the great work that that went into getting those comments to USDA. Very collaborative. Staff did a ton of work, and they turned out really, really excellently, in my opinion. Another area that we're spending a lot of time on, just as an agency, is quote unquote reopening state government to the public and what that looks like. Obviously, we're still, for the most part, virtual. Obviously, we have certain functions at ODA that cannot be virtual, but for those that can, we still are. So as you know, vaccinations are rolling out, as guidances are changing, what that really looks like for us as an agency, bringing people back into the office, reopening to the public. Right now, our buildings are open only by appointment if needed, and really trying to navigate what this looks like for the broader state government, and then what that means for ODA. And Lisa Hansen is actually on one of the work groups that's meeting to try and help establish what that kind of looks like. A lot of, I think, staff are really interested in a hybrid model where they're in the office part-time, but also working remotely part-time. And so there's a lot that goes into that, with you're thinking about existing office structure and footprint and all of those types of things, resources needed to support staff at home. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is around specialty crop block grant. So every year we get funding for from USDA to do projects in the state to support our specialty crop sectors. That's usually around $1.5 million to $2 million. We are finalizing the awards for the 2021 grant cycle, but because of some of the COVID recovery programs that the federal government, additional spending that the federal government passed last year, we'll be getting about an additional $2.5 million to help invest and support specialty crop programs targeted towards COVID impacts, COVID recovery. And so we're really excited to be rolling those out early summer, we think, and do, again, a request for proposals around helping industries really recover from the specialty crop industries from COVID. So more to come on that, and just wanted to flag that for the board, but we'll certainly share more information as that becomes available. With that, I think that I will end, Vice Chair Harper. Thank you. But happy to take questions if there are any.
Brian Harper here. Any questions for Director Taylor?
Barbara Boyer has one. So Director Taylor, you broke up a little bit when you were talking about the comments submitted on the climate shift. Are we going to get a copy of that? Okay.
Yeah, we will share that afterwards.
All right, thank you. Okay, thanks.
Brian Harper here. Any other questions for Director Taylor in her report? Okay, I guess not. Thank you, Director Taylor. Next up, we have ODA's 2021-23 budget and legislative update. That's going to be Lauren and Jonathan in for Lisa Hansen.
Good morning, Chair Harper, board members. Lauren Henderson, I'm the Assistant Director with the Department of Agriculture. Just sound checking, Jonathan, are you with us? There you are. Good morning. I wanted to mention just a couple of things, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan to talk about all things legislative, and then I'll try to finish on budget. For the new board members, Randy and Chad, and anybody else, there's lots of numbers in our budget. You heard about some of our programs. This is the money part that funds those programs. It's pretty complicated. I'll just tell you that. So don't worry about absorbing everything. I've been doing this for a while myself and can't keep it in my head anymore. But I just wanted to say right at the start, usually when we do our legislative work and our budget work, it feels like a sprint to the finish line. This time's been a little bit different in the sense that we've had to do it differently, virtually. We've not been together. And so it seems like we've run a long distance race and a sprint race at the same time. And we could not have done it without our budget team and our legislative team led by Deputy Director Hansen. It has been a monumental task, and we have done it, I think, as well as we've ever done it. And that is no small feat. And so I'm pretty proud. I know Alexis and Lisa are too, in what we've done and how we've done it. We've done it the right way. And the right way means you've been transparent, you've been over communicating, and you've been available when people ask questions to help answer those questions. And that's a really important part of the legislative and budget process. We were actually, I believe, the first agency in the Senate to testify on some policy bills and got those out. And so they rely on us sometimes to be ready, and we were. So I'll just say that it goes kind of unnoticed sometimes because we get in and we get out, but we still have a ways to go. And so I'm going to turn this over to Jonathan. You can talk about legislative stuff, and then I'll wrap up with budget.
Great, thank you. Chair Harper, Director Taylor, members of the board, Jonathan Sandow, Department of Ag. Kind of how Alexis and Lauren mentioned, we are hitting that home stretch. We've got about 5 weeks left this session. The constitutional sine die is the 27th. So we are getting there. You know, what at times feels very slowly and at other times feels like it's moving pretty quickly. But we're in that kind of period where the policy committees are wrapping up. And so this week and next week are kind of the end game for the policy committees. They will essentially shut down next week. And then the entire focus shifts to the budget work, kind of bringing it to the end stretch. There are a few policy committees that stay active to the end of session, but the majority of that work then wraps up kind of this week and next week. And so just to kind of give a recap of the sense of where we were, where we started, just over 2,400 bills were officially introduced to the start of the session. Those have, you know, dwindled down through deadlines, through actually moving across, you know, chambers, folks pulling bills back. And right now we're sitting about in the Ways and Means Committee. There's about over 300 bills that are in the policy bills that are in the Ways and Means Committee that have price tags. And so they get to work through those bills over the next coming weeks. And then in those policy committees that are still active, there's about a collective count of 600 bills that are still within those policy committees. So if you follow that math, it's around 900 just policy bills that are still somewhere active in the process until the end of session. And so it's quite a bit of work, you know, in front of the legislators and everyone that works around and through that process. As for ODA, we started the session with 8 bills, kind of the agencies. You know, we've given out those kind of summary sheets. And during session, we pulled 2 of those back for various reasons. One was Senate Bill 35, which was kind of our own version of the hemp language to bring our program into compliance with the federal government. There's a lot of work around hemp bills currently, and so we just, you know, took one out of the mix of that and kind of consolidated the efforts there. And then another one was Senate Bill 34, which was an aviation's fuel bill that we had worked on. We found an administrative pathway to get to the same end. And so again, in the spirit of a virtual session, we try to limit how many bills were out there and how much, you know, work folks had to engage in. So, and then on the other 6 bills that we had, 3 of them were fee bills. And so those are, you know, makes up about 1% of or less than that, I guess, of what's in Ways and Means. And so those 3 bills are down in Ways and Means. And they'll be wrapped up into our budget conversation as we go forward in the coming weeks. And then we had 3 other policy bills. 2 of them are awaiting the governor's signature. So they've cleared both chambers and they're kind of in that process to get the governor's signatures. And that was House Bill 2032, the Ag Channels fixed that allows us to implement that program kind of in that regional approach. And then 2033, which was our ask to be able to deputize veterinary technicians during emergencies, to be able to deploy them alongside our deputized veterinarians. So they're kind of assistant staff that can go out during emergency times. And then our third policy bill, our pesticides certification and training one, is up for a Senate vote this next week. And so once it clears that second chamber, it'll be off to the governor's office for governor's signature. So everything that we've moved and engaged with on our own side has moved smoothly, and we'll be kind of wrapping up our end of those policy works next week once we clear the second chamber, and then pretty much into the budget. And as Director Taylor mentioned, we are staying busy with informational hearings, requests on other bills that relate to ag and other issues that come up around there. But like I mentioned, we're getting close. We got 5 weeks left. I think the tensions and the exhaustion are taking over in the legislature, even though folks have been on virtual meetings or in and out of the building. If they're legislators, they're definitely, I think people are getting to that point in session where they're ready to go home and kind of put an end to the session. So we'll hopefully see this come to a smooth ending here in the next 5 weeks, and be able to wrap up our budget work. The only other kind of what I'll end with is just doesn't directly relate to kind of the department or the board, but just for folks to be aware that there will be a special session around redistricting. That's kind of a known that will come up. What's not known is if there'll be other policy considerations during that special session, if there'll be kind of an e-board, more budget kind of work around the federal funding around ARPA dollars, or other works. Director Taylor mentioned the revenue forecast that comes out today. I think the Department of Revenue has and the budget wonks over in the building have been very cautious about it, because the tax filing deadline was Monday. And so it's not going to be that complete picture that we've seen in the past. It's not going to be a kind of that as solid as revenue forecasting at the end of session that we've had in years past. So just kind of a forward-looking thinking around that is, there will be some work to be done, I think, in the interim, a little bit more than what has been in previous sessions. So with that, Lauren, I'll hand it back to you to talk budgets.
Before I do too much in the budget, is there any questions that you might have of Jonathan? If you think of one, we can do it at the end as well. All right, Jonathan, good job. No questions. I'll bet they'll come up with one though. So just high level budget. We talked, I think, once before with the board about the governor's budget. We're still in kind of a holding pattern. We did, Director Taylor did, the presentation at our public hearing on our budget. That went really, really well. We had a day of public testimony that was well attended, very diverse in the presentations, all over the place and subject. That's always a good thing. And so that shows that people are interested in the Department of Ag and what we do, and fully engaged. And so pleased about how that went. We're waiting for our work session, and today happens to be a very, very important day. And not only is it the Board of Agriculture meeting today, which is very important, but the revenue forecast for the state and the economic forecast will be heard this afternoon. And the legislature is waiting for that. The budget writers need that forecast to determine how much money is available to put in agency programs or state programs. And just to remind you what some of the bigger asks for money are, it's always education, it's always public safety, and it's always human services. And then the other programs beyond that. So they need the forecast in order to set those marks for those programs, and then whatever's left over is what helps to fund all of the other things. And so I saw already there are agencies scheduled for work sessions next week that have general fund in them. So that means they will be meeting to talk about agency budgets and allocating dollars to solidify those budgets and move them along. As Jonathan said, they only really have 5 weeks to do a whole lot of work. And so our governor's budget is $133 million right now. They will be looking and considering what the governor has proposed. We support the governor's budget and making decisions based off that budget and some of the things that they need to do to balance the state's budget. Just for context, our current service level budget, and what that means is how much would it cost next biennium to do exactly what we're doing today? It's about $133 million, and our governor's budget is $133 million. So it's pretty flat. Not a lot of increases. Now, to get to that governor's budget, there were forecasted to be some pretty severe reductions in our budget. As you remember, not so long ago, they were forecasting some pretty deep holes in state budgets. We'll know today whether those holes are still there or not. I think one of the other things that I don't know a lot about, and so I won't talk a lot about it, is the American Recovery Act and the dollars that are coming to the state. The legislature is going, and frankly the governor, have a big task ahead of them, and to figure out what the wisest use of those billions of dollars is going to be, and at what portion of those can be used for state agency programs. They still have to put that puzzle together. We have not been involved except on the peripheral around certain things around that for our budget necessarily. Some of the variables that we're looking for in the economic forecast today are lottery funds. With the closures of businesses, restaurants, and bars, a lot of those businesses generate a lot of the lottery dollars that we receive through the Parks Fund. And with them being closed, that money has dropped off significantly. We've had allocations from the lottery as low as 25% and as high as 80%. It's been all over the place. And so we have to manage our lottery funds just like we do our other cash balances in our programs. If the money's not there, even though you have permission to spend it, you can't spend it. And Deputy Director Hansen and I saw early on in the pandemic that we needed to do something proactively quickly, or we would not have been able to make it through the biennium and would have been at the E-board asking for more dollars because we didn't manage it well. Thankfully, we didn't want to be there, and we didn't have to be there, and are going to make it to the end of the biennium with what we have, and that's a good thing. But we will be looking to see what happens to those lottery dollars as well. Barbara, you know this. OWEB is anxiously, I think, waiting on that too. Parks certainly will be waiting on that too, as it really impacted those agencies as well. I wanted to mention one thing, and then I can open it up for some questions. But we've taken a different approach, and I think you will see us be, I think I'm safe to say this, a little more aggressive than we have been going forward in our budget. When we've had policy bills that have had fiscals in them, we can't absorb any more work in our agency. We've been the little agency that could for a long time. And I think it's starting to show. We are asking staff, I'm feeling it, we're all feeling it, to do more and more and more, and they just can't do more. The sponge is full. And so when we get asked to do other programs, we are not going to be shy to put dollars with it and resist the temptation that some people have that says, oh, you can't just suck it up. We can't suck it up anymore. And so we will be more active, I think, in our budget proposals going forward. We will be more active in policy bills and have been, frankly. And that brings me to my next subject, hemp. If you've read the news at all, Southern Oregon is experiencing a real catastrophe down there. I guess that's the best way to say it. The community is really struggling with all things that are going on in cannabis in that community, and we can talk about all the reasons why. Our part to that is we need resources, staff, in the hemp program. When we started, we had 13 growers, and frankly have been playing catch up ever since because it blew up in the number of growers. We're well over 1,000, and we can give you the stats about all of that, but have 4 staff really, and we've had to borrow those staff from the weed program. And so we have a budget package for 4 more staff. It's paid for with other funds. The cash is there, but there are serious discussions going on to double that number to 8, to put with the 4. That will give us 12, and I don't even think that will be enough for a while. So you will hear from us ongoing. You may hear that the department is increasing staff levels in the hemp program so that we can be in Southern Oregon in a bigger presence to try to figure out who's legal and who's not. And of those that are legal, and when I say legal, they've actually done what they're supposed to in registering and getting a registration from us and showing us what their grow sites are and those things. There is a lot of illegal activity down there that's not registered with either ODA or OLCC. And law enforcement is also struggling with resources in order to get their arms around that. That situation has to be dealt with soon. And so we will be active in building up an enforcement team to do that, and have even borrowed our lead investigator and probably most experienced, Mike Odenthal, from our pesticides program to help train staff and get them off on the right track there. So I will just mention that it's taking a lot of our time to build that program up. It is other funded, the money is there, and we hope that we're successful in building that team up so that they can be successful and at least help that situation in Southern Oregon. Just one other thing, Jonathan mentioned our fee bills. As a reminder, out of the $133 million that I just mentioned that's in the governor's budget, $80 million of that is reliant on other funds. Our budget is predominantly dependent on those other funds. That's license fees, registration fees, fee-for-service programs. And so we can remind the board what those programs are at a later date if you'd like. But that's why it's so important to be engaged with our industry on what those fees are, what they pay for, and we have done that and will continue to do that as we go forward with the fee bills. I will stop there. Alexis, if you have anything to add, please do. Questions?
Yes,
Mr. Chair.
Shantae.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. This is Shantae Johnson. I wanted to ask some questions about the American Rescue funding. And have you heard like kind of what the timeline is on that and when funds are set to be released? I know you mentioned that the governor has to do the heavy lifting of reviewing all of the proposals, I'm sure, that came in. But when do we expect some of those funds to be released out?
Yeah, hey, I can take that for Lauren. Thanks for that question, Shantae. For the record, Alexis Taylor. So I think it's still pretty unclear on timing of the funds being released. So on what's today? So last week, Treasury rolled out their initial, and it's an interim final rule for guidance. So that means they're taking comments on it and it could change. The state, our CFO's office and the legislative fiscal office are working hand in hand to review that guidance on what it says those things can or cannot be used for. And so I think it's unclear exactly how the legislature and the governor are going to work together on, or how that process is going to work. They are going to work together on how those dollars are going to be spent, or what the timing looks like, because this guidance is still very new, so they're still trying to parse out, and they know it may change. For a reminder, by way of background, the state is getting $2.6 billion. The way, before the guidance came out from Treasury, the way the state had kind of talked about parsing that out was about $240 million would go to legislative priorities. They were thinking about, some additional money to behavioral health and healthcare, additional money to worker and business support, some additional funding to housing needs, and then some additional funding to the natural resource bucket. You know, when you see all of the things that people have talked about this funding could go to, that money has been spent, you know, 30 times over. That 2.6 billion is spent, you know, 30 times over or something like that. So they are going to have to really, the legislature and the governor are really figure out where those big priorities are. In the ARPA dollars, the initial read of what came out from Treasury is basically more or less, if it was eligible for those CARES Act dollars, the coronavirus relief fund that happened early last year, it's still eligible for ARPA. So think about all that, you know, COVID response dollars, public health dollars, those types of things. There are a couple other clear expansions. It can go to infrastructure for broadband, and then infrastructure for 2 water infrastructure projects under EPA. So I think it was the drinking water program and the clean water program. And those were specifically called out. There's also a provision that allows it to go to replace lost revenue for states. The challenge is, I think, the way they said what that lost revenue, how that's calculated, is not how we figure out our budget in the state. And so now the CFO and LFO are trying to figure out, can we even come up with that number? Just because the way certain revenue is calculated in the state, like gas tax for the Highway Trust Fund, is actually considered other fund in the state and not general fund. And so there's some of those weird calculations that they're trying to work through. So all that to say, we have initial guidance, but I really don't have a clear picture of what timing looks like. I also know the Racial Justice Council, it has a role in this. I know there were discussions and those priorities on what priorities around the Racial Justice Council would like to see investments in. And I know those conversations are ongoing with the governor, and Shantae, you actually might be able to provide additional clarity there for us, but I know that's an important lens for the governor as well.
See, Mr. Chairman, Elaine Miller, I just want to applaud what Lauren has said in regards to the hemp issue down south. I also chair the Oregon Wine Council, and it's affecting our members pretty dramatically. And to have more folks on the ground from law enforcement as well as ODA, and ensuring we support those growers that are doing the right thing and those that aren't, that we're dealing with, you know, paying people in cash as well as dealing with water issues and everything else. So it is a real issue for us. So thank you.
And one thing, thank you for that, Elaine, if I could just add, Alexis Taylor for the record, that on the water issues, we have been funding out of the Hemp program an assistant water master under Water Resources Department, because we had early on, you know, I think it was maybe 2 years ago, been getting a lot of complaints from this part of the state in particular about people using water that they might not have a water right for, or using water rights inappropriately or incorrectly. And so we've been working with Water Resources to help fund a position down there focused specifically on this. And they've been doing really good work, and we've continued that on. Lauren, correct me if I'm wrong, but for the next biennium as well. And so that's been a really important partnership to try and wrap our arms around the scope of the issue down there, and making sure people understand what their water right is, what their water, how they can or should not be using it.
And thank you for that, Elaine. We have a lot more work to do as a state. I think one of the biggest obstacles that we face, the state faces, is, and the community faces, there are parts down there that are pretty dangerous. You just don't walk on and say, hi, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you. And so we have to keep safety in mind always. You know, when the police tell you, we don't even feel comfortable going there, that is a big problem. And so it's going to take a monumental effort, pardon my words, to clean it up. And so it's not going to happen overnight. It's unfortunate it's happened at all. down there. And I think it is what you say. Those that are legitimate and trying to do it right need to be protected as well in order for them to continue on with their livelihood. The spillover into neighbors is unfortunate, and that's an understatement. And then the community itself, because it has changed, I think, what's happening around there. So there will be lots of state conversations with lots of people, local, state, federal, on that issue down there in order to get our arms around it and moving forward. But our little piece of that is more resources and frankly maturing the program. It's new and it takes a while to get up to speed on what you can and cannot do within the confines of the law. And so we've used a lot of DOJ time and we'll continue to do that. So.
Thank you.
So Barbara Boyer, for the record. So Lauren, on that topic, I know it's, like you said, it's a new program and you're still trying to figure it out, but just from the lens you have now, where do you think the breakdown was in this whole topic?
I actually think it was a combination of a lot of little things that then devolved into some very big things. Cannabis grow in Southern Oregon is not a new thing. I'll just say it that way, regulated or not. I think what we're seeing is some out-of-state cartels that have decided that maybe the gaps that are in the regulatory structure, they took advantage of the lack of resources, I think locally and state, walked in, overwhelmed the building codes by building massive greenhouse structures, paid cash for building permits to instruct hundreds of greenhouses. And we know that some of them say, oh, I got a hemp license, and law enforcement's been hard pressed to get search warrants to be able to go onto those properties. That's been a big challenge because you have to have a reason and you have to have probable cause. Well, when you can't get in there to see and look for lots of reasons, that's been difficult. We don't have the resources to check and test everything. The biggest challenge, though, is you cannot tell the difference between hemp and marijuana. It looks the same. You can make some conclusions about it, but it's not like corn and peas. And so that probably is the number one challenge. I've kiddingly told OSU, Dean Sams, can you guys at least make it a different color or make it smell pretty and different or something? And I get laughed at. But maybe your researchers will figure out how to do that one of these days, because that would be a big help. But that is the biggest challenge, which means in order to figure out is it legal or not, is it hot or not, you have to be there. You have to test it. You have to get results, and those results have to be court ready. And so those are the bigger challenges that we've had. But for now, we start with the resources and working together. We've always been working together. It's just been difficult. And so that's a great question. I've stayed up night thinking about what could we have done differently. And I'm not sure we could have done anything, partly because of the safety issue. There have been places that we've told our staff, if you see guard dogs and AR-15s, you do not go there. And we've had to tell staff, do not go there. It's not worth their safety. And at the same time, it's really gotten worse, and Elin knows this well. It's gotten worse and really hasn't plateaued, I don't think. And so it's time to make a dent there.
All right, thank you for that observation, Lauren.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren and Jonathan. We're going to move on, since we're running on a little bit here, and move on to the ODA Produce Safety Program update. Susanna Pearlstein and Casey Prentice.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. I don't know if Casey is on. Okay.
I don't know.
Just so you know, I have my video on, but I'm also calling in on the phone. Carla, it looks like you're ready to go. Okay. All right. Well, thanks everybody
Susanna.
Oh, hey, Casey, go ahead.
Good morning. Sorry, I had a little trouble getting off of mute here. I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Casey Prentice with the Market Access and Certification Program. And I wanted to thank all of you for having us this morning. And Dr. Susanna Pearlstein is going to give you a short presentation on produce safety, and then we can answer some questions. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you all very much again. Carla, go ahead, next slide, please. So I'm going to go fairly quickly here and just give everybody a brief refresher on the Food Safety Modernization Act Produce Safety Rule so that we can all get up to the same speed. And then I'll talk about our program here at ODA. We are currently in the last year of our 5-year grant cycle funding. And then I'll talk about FDA's inspections in Oregon fairly briefly. And then we'll look at our next 5-year grant cycle that we did just apply for. Next slide. So the produce safety rule really is there to establish this culture of prevention and setting these minimum standards for growing, harvesting, packing, and holding of produce that we typically eat raw. And so it's focused on microbial contaminants of this produce that we eat raw, and not as much on things that we can typically see. So it sets these standards for things like worker health and hygiene related to worker training, agricultural water, equipment cleaning and sanitization, that type of thing. And many farms around the country have these cultures of food safety and already participate in something like a food safety audit, but there are many out there that don't have those going on as they're growing their business. Next slide. And so as we talk about the produce safety rule, we really focus on what is being grown. So there are things that are on FDA's rarely consumed raw list. So something like a potato would not be subject or covered by the produce safety rule, but something like an onion is. And so once we've identified first, hey, what are you growing? And does that fall under coverage by the produce safety rule? We then first look at how much is being grown. So, and this is based on farm size categories are based on average produce sales over the last 3 years. Next slide. And that average produce sale, it's really important, or it was really more important probably when the rule first came out. So as you can see in the green chart, the largest farms, they were subject to coming into compliance first in 2018. And that also, those staggered compliance dates have also staggered when operations and different farm sizes were inspected. So all farms right now, if they're subject to the produce safety rule, do need to be in compliance. However, soon after the rule came out in 2017, the agricultural water portion of the rule was put on hold. And what that means is it's not being regulated on. However, on an FDA inspection, somebody would be asked about agricultural water, but it also means that they don't have to be sampling in accordance to the rule at this time. Now, while today the water portion is still on hold and we're waiting for that update, the largest farms will need to be in compliance with the water portion in less than a year. So right now, we still do not have an update from FDA, but we do expect that any day. Another thing with the rule, just to keep in mind, especially as it certainly impacts our winery industries in Oregon, was enforcement discretion did come out for certain types of crops. And this applies to things like wine grapes and hops that typically undergo a fermentation process or microbial kill step before it reaches the consumer. And it also applies to things like pulse crops and almonds. And so if operations are growing those things, it essentially means that they would not be subject to an FDA-led inspection in Oregon. Next slide. Now I'm going to transition to talk about our program here at ODA. So in addition to Casey's time and my time, we have 3 full-time staff. And then we also have an intergovernmental agreement with Oregon State University. And through all of this partnership, we're working on essentially 3 main pillars. we have education and outreach that we really focus on through our grower training classes. We compile and verify a farm inventory, and then we also conduct technical assistance all around the state. Next slide. Through our partnership with Oregon State University, we have really key members around the state. So the blue stars show where our ODA staff are located. But with OSU's partnership, with Louisa Santa Maria, we're able to reach that mid-valley section up in Aurora, where we don't currently have staff. But we also have a very unique situation in Oregon in that we have regional and national experts on board working with us on a daily basis to help us identify knowledge gaps while expanding our geographical reach. Next slide. Our education and outreach through our grower training classes is one of the pillars of our work, in that during COVID-19 right now, those classes are free and offered during 2 half days. This also, by offering these classes, we're meeting one of the requirements in the produce safety rule, where every covered farm needs to have at least one person attend a recognized training. Next slide. And we're offering these classes in English and in Spanish. So Louisa is helping us teach our Spanish class next week. Thank you very much, Louisa. And that will end our season of training for this current year. But what you can see in the graph is numbers of people in the bar side of the graph, numbers of people who have attended training each year. And then in the line with the dot on it, that shows numbers of classes that we've had each year. And so you can probably see a couple of things here. Number one, it looks like we're training fewer people, because we are. We had a large, and that's probably because of a couple of reasons. In part, this first blush of the new regulation of FSMA has kind of worn off. But we've also, because these classes are a one and done, you don't have to return. Once people have taken these classes, as many had in the first few years that we were offering them, they have not needed to come back. So while we've offered 46 classes and trained over 1,100 people, this year in 2021, we did train some of our fewest numbers this year. And that's partly because these classes are being offered online. And so there's less of an investment in terms of time and travel, since you don't have to do any travel for these classes. And so we frequently are getting people registered, but then they're not actually attending, or they'll sign up for the next remote class. So there are pros and cons, certainly, of doing this work remotely. Next slide, please. In addition to the grower training classes, we are, as a requirement of our grant with FDA, compiling and maintaining a farm inventory. And this is to help identify the farms around the state that are subject to the produce safety rule. And then that information periodically gets uploaded to FDA so that they can do their work planning for inspections. And I would say that this is the largest part of our staff's effort in terms of a lot of cold calling of operations and talking through the specifics of coverage and the very unique farm situations that we have in Oregon. Next slide. We also spend a significant amount of time, excuse me, on technical assistance visits. These on-farm readiness reviews are a way that we can point to some of our technical assistance work. During COVID, we do have a remote option. We've found that several farms are willing to do that, but I would say more than half are really just wanting us to call back when we can do in-person visits. We've done over 100 so far since starting the program, and right now we have about 30 folks that are interested in doing them this year. These are confidential and non-regulatory visits and really help, especially after folks have gone through the Produce Safety Alliance class and had a conversation with us about coverage or not. It really helps walk through the very specific items that people have going on their operations, and we're looking at it through the lens of the produce safety rule. So we're checking alignment here. It's not a mock inspection, however, but it can get folks ready for one. Next slide. This is really just a summary of our first 5 years of work. And so in 2017, the water portion of the produce safety rule was put on hold. That was also the year that Stephanie Page worked to get Senate Bill 18 passed, where while we do have a non-regulatory program in Oregon, we could move to a regulatory program. It has not been adopted into reference. We've done a lot of hiring over the years to build the program up. Large farm inspections started nationwide in 2019. And then while we had a handful of inspections in 2020, with COVID-19, those were really postponed. And we do expect those inspections to begin again in 2021. And we also did this year apply for the next round of 5-year grant cycle funding. Next slide. While there's a lot of things to point to in terms of things we've done in addition to all of the kind of 3 main pillars of our work, I would like to highlight some of our materials that we've developed in terms of our on-farm readiness review demonstration videos that we were able to shoot at East Multnomah Soil and Water Conservation District Headwaters Incubator Farm. We have a series of videos now that goes through different portions of the produce safety rule and helps folks see what an on-farm readiness review might look like with them. Granted, we wouldn't have a whole group of people out there during these visits. But the other thing is we are uniquer in the nation in that we do a modified, or can do, a modified Produce Safety Alliance grower training class. And again, nobody else is doing these, which is pretty special in that we're really identifying or helping folks understand coverage more thoroughly is what we're gaining, I think, from our post-class information that we collect from participants. Next slide. So I'm going to transition again to talk really quickly about the FDA produce safety rule inspections. Again, they started nationwide in 2019. And that year we did have 117 farms in Oregon that were inspected. Now, that year, while we did over 60 on-farm readiness reviews, 32% of the inspected farms did have on-farm readiness reviews. And FDA didn't find many issues during the inspections in Oregon. There were some items related to personnel training, as well as equipment cleaning and sanitization. But those are common themes around the nation and were not unique to Oregon. Again, the inspections in 2020, there were a handful that were conducted, but for the most part, they were postponed. And we do expect inspections to start in 2021, but at this time, we don't have a start date, so farms are not being called at this time. Next slide. So this is our last year of the current grant cycle, but we did just apply for the next 5 years. And we did apply to continue in a non-regulatory capacity. The maximum that we could apply for funding for the next year is $630,000, excuse me, which is less than previous maximum funding for this current grant cycle. But just because we did apply for non-regulatory funding at this time, we do have that option to move forward if that is the desire of the department and our industry in Oregon. Next slide. I put together a really brief timeline for moving forward with our next 5 years. There's not much to add here except that we've applied for cycle 2 with our 5 years of grant funding, and that next year in January of 2022, the water compliance dates are occurring for large farms, and then each year after that it will be for small farms and very small farms. And I think that the main point here is that we're working every day with our local and our state, regional, as well as national partners to implement a culture of food safety, not just in Oregon, but nationwide. Next slide. And with that, I just wanted to thank you guys very much for your time. And if there are any questions, I'm here.
Barbara Boyer, I have a question quickly. I won't take up too much time. Great presentation, thank you. And I'm curious, what is the, if ODA decided to go regulatory, what is the funding What's that funding availability? What's the figure?
Yeah, so the funding availability for an inspection program, and so let's keep in mind that FDA has come up with these funding tiers based on estimated numbers of covered farms in Oregon. So at this time, and this is based on NASS 2017 data, we have about 1,500 covered farms in Oregon. But then they also go into how many of those operations are in our farm inventories. So with an additional, basically for an inspection funding based on numbers of farms that we have, it would be an additional about 400,000, give or take.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Susanna, thank you so much. Casey, did you have anything to add?
I do not. Thank you, Brian. Really appreciate you guys having us, and please feel free to reach out anytime if you guys have questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Casey. Thank you, Susanna. Brian Harper, of course, for the record. Let's see. I guess we're moving on to our panel led by Stephanie Page. We also have Doug Woodcock, Sean Clements, Smita Mehta, Marianne Cooper, April Snell, and Jeff Stone for the Planning for Long-Term Agricultural Water Supply in Oregon.
All right, good morning, board members. Stephanie Page for the record. I'll just make some introductory remarks and then turn it over to our panelists. I'd like to start by thanking all of the agency and stakeholder panelists who are joining me today to talk about water supply planning. So you'll hear from them about multiple tools that are available to plan for water supply for the future, and you'll get some different perspectives on the benefits and limitations of those tools. And I hope this information will be helpful over the next couple of years as we'll be reviewing the board's existing water-related resolutions as part of our normal review process and possibly considering whether additional resolutions are needed. So why is water supply planning important to Oregon agriculture? A large percentage of our value of agricultural production comes from irrigated lands. Ag lands are higher value, irrigated lands are higher value per acre, and the value of production is much higher than non-irrigated lands. About 43% of all farms in Oregon use irrigation, but irrigated farmland accounts for about 78% of the total market value of agricultural products sold in Oregon. Agriculture is also the largest consumer of water that's withdrawn in our state, and about 78% of the water withdrawn from surface or groundwater sources in Oregon is used for irrigation. As background for today's panel, I provided a briefing paper that describes some of the existing water supply planning tools in the state. And really the focus of the paper and the conversation today are place-based planning and reservations of water. Over the last couple of years, we've heard interest in ODA seeking additional water reservations from some of our stakeholders, and this has led to discussions with the other agency panelists who are here with me today about some of the benefits and limitations of reservations and about what the most appropriate tools are for water supply planning for agriculture and other needs. As the briefing paper notes, reservations can preserve a priority date for water users who apply for water rights for multi-purpose storage. To date, we have not had any water rights issued against those existing reservations. The briefing paper also describes some of the ways that ODA has been engaged around water supply planning. We've applied for reservations of water, and we've worked closely with Water Resources Department over the last few years to extend existing reservations. We've also engaged in place-based planning, and that was predominantly our staff person, Margaret Matter, who many of you got to know while she was with ODA. We've also engaged in forecasting ag demand, and then on the in-stream side, we have a critical role in working with agriculture to attain the state's water quality and fish recovery goals. And our engagement is taking place with a backdrop of a changing climate where water supply issues are very challenging and likely to remain that way for decades. And certainly we're seeing that this year. And that's something that Margaret Matter, our water quantity specialist who recently departed ODA for a promotion in Colorado, spent quite a bit of time talking about in her engagement with stakeholders. So a few questions to think about as you listen to the panelists today. how should the board's resolutions address the role of water reservations in water supply planning, given that there's still interest in reservations, but we haven't had use of the reservations to date? How should resolutions incorporate some of the newer planning tools like state or stakeholder-led place-based planning processes? Members of the organizations you'll hear from today have made tremendous investments in water conservation, and another consideration could be how to recognize these accomplishments as well as future opportunities in irrigation system modernization. The board's climate change resolution expresses support for incentives for irrigation modernization, and this could be incorporated into resolutions related to water supply as well. So the board has existing resolutions around water supply, and those were shared with you as background. And then, as I just noted, there's also a resolution around climate change that references the impacts of a changing climate to water supplies. With that, I will turn it over to the rest of our panelists, starting with Doug Woodcock, Deputy Director of the Oregon Water Resources Department.
Sorry, struggling with the mute here this morning. Good morning, Doug Woodcock, Deputy Director with Oregon Water Resources Department, Chair Harper, board members, and Director Taylor. Thank you so much for the invitation to talk about this important issue or issues today. We have a large panel today, so I'm going to keep it fairly brief. It sounds like Stephanie would like this to be a conversation, so we can do questions during the presentation, or we can wait till the end, the board's choice. So, as noted, reservations, I'm going to start with that, are blocks of water removed from the department's water availability tables. So the water availability tables are what we use to determine whether there is water to allocate to new users. And so this water has been removed and set aside for future economic purposes through storage in multi-purpose reservoirs. There are several benefits to this, obviously. First of all, this block of water has been set aside. That's a really good thing. And the future use retains the priority date of the reservation adoption. So ODA has reserved many blocks of water for future use. Many of them have a 1992 priority. That's of great value to somebody who's going to be getting a water right today. Another benefit is multi-purpose storage, which is the requirement, offers a lot of flexibility of uses. So those are all just a few benefits there. But there are some limitations to reservations as well that complicate its management. Your reservation is not a permit to use water. So someone who wants to use water on a reservation, they still need to apply for a primary storage right and a secondary water right to actually use the water. The rules and statutes in place at the time of applying for a storage right are considered. So what that means is that even though these reservations have a priority date of 1992, somebody coming in today, like myself, if I were to come in and point at a particular reservation and say, I want to use some of that, my application would be reviewed under the rules and statutes that are in place today, not what was in place in 1992. A requirement that in-stream values will be enhanced when somebody wants to use a reservation is a requirement in the basin programs that the reservations reside. There may be a requirement that bypass flows are required on the storage permit. And just fundamentally, developing storage can be a big lift. So those are all just a kind of a handful of limitations and hurdles around the reservations. As mentioned, there are several reservations that are in place. ODA has filed for some examples of the Burnt River, Powder River, Hood River, Grand Ronde, Malheur, Owyhee, Malheur Lake would be another one. And like I said, most of these have a 1992 priority date. They have reached their expiration date and have been extended at ODA's request. So now I want to say that these extensions will get these reservations to an expiration date of the late 2030s now. None of the, as Stephanie mentioned, none of these blocks of water held in reserve have been permitted or put to beneficial use. So they are, like I said, they've been removed from the water availability table. So that's a block of water that's out there, but they have not been put to use yet. I would note that we have just recently, we have one watershed group, I think it's in the Hood Basin, pursuing the feasibility of testing using the aquifer underground as a multi-purpose storage reservoir. So that is very innovative, and we are keeping an eye on that to see if that can in fact be a good way to utilize this older priority date water for multi-purposes. So reservations are a tool that can be utilized for future development, but there are other tools that can be used as well in conjunction mainly with reservations, and these consist in the category of water planning. So you have likely, you're likely familiar with or have heard of the state's integrated water resources strategy. That is a large effort that started, well, with the legislature giving us the direction to work on an integrated strategy. One was adopted back in 2012. It's supposed to be updated every 5 years. So our most recent one was 2017. We have an update coming in 2022. And the IWRS provides the framework for water planning. It identifies the issues in Oregon that we should be considering. You know, it shows both successes and our challenges that are before us. Would say that water planning can be grand in scale. And by scale, I'm talking about geography. We can be looking at basin-wide, or we can be looking at a single drainage. It can be, you know, we can be looking at broad issues over an area, or we can be very focused in what we're going after. And what is the time scale that we're after? How much time are you giving yourself to be successful in this water planning effort? So all of those permutations come together to put together a water plan. Place-based planning is one that is promoted within the integrated water resources strategy. Place-based planning is a state-supported planning process. Our department got some dollars to work with groups that looked like they were prepared to undertake this challenging planning effort. And water planning is challenging. Don't think it isn't there. So we have 4 groups in the state. We've got the Mid-Coast, we've got the Harney Basin, we've got the Lower John Day, and we've got the Upper Grand Ronde. All have been working on this. I think we are coming up on 6 years now in this water planning effort. The department provided guidance in how to step through place-based planning. And fundamentally, place-based planning is a diverse group of interests in a basin that have come together, and they identify what their in-stream needs are and what their out-of-stream needs are, and what are their resources that they have available to them, and identifying all the local issues that may be unique to them, the things that they need to be considering in moving forward with a water plan. Many of these, or these groups, after this 6 years, are entering in the final phase of this planning effort, and that's what we call the Step 5 plan. That is their plan. So they are all working towards that. It's a collaborative effort, and that is something that we feel is very important in moving forward. And so the example I would use here, I started off with reservations. Place-based planning is a collaborative effort that's looking at a broad range of interests. Reservations is a requirement that water be stored in multi-purpose storage for future economic uses. What a nice pair to have the community coming together and looking at a block of water that has been reserved for future use that can be used for multi-purpose. So the group can get together and identify how that water should be carved up there. And we've got some of the groups are doing just that, looking at that very issue. If the planning coordinator for our department, who works with both the Lower John Day and the Upper Grand Ronde, if he were here, I'm sure he could wax poetic about the conversations that those groups have been having about how they want reservations to fit in with their water future. There are other planning, as I mentioned, there's all kinds of different water planning that people can do, but other efforts in the state include the WISE effort down in the Rogue Basin, the Columbia Umatilla Task Force, and the Deschutes Basin Collaborative are all efforts of locally led groups coming together to work on their water future. So all of these efforts are addressing how water will be utilized and managed in the future. And just, I guess in summary, I would say that we feel that these locally led efforts make much more sense than how we used to do water planning as a state agency. It was very much state-led. We would come into a basin and we would effectively tell people what we were going to be working on and how the water was going to be managed with their input, but it was not a locally led collaborative study or effort by any means. So we think that there's a much better opportunity for success when it is locally led and the community is working towards a common goal. Having said that, the department is undertaking an independent assessment of the department's water planning with a specific look at the place-based planning model that we have been working with. So what are the lessons learned? What's worked well? What hasn't? How can the state best support water planning in Oregon? So the place-based portion of this will likely be wrapped up in 2021, that independent look at how place-based has worked, and the broader working with the stakeholders and the state agencies, given everything that's happened in the last year, is now going to likely spill over into 2022. But I would like to offer up to the board here, if you are interested at a future meeting, that we come back and provide you with the results of that assessment. So with that, I will offer up for any questions or pass it on to the next panelist.
All right.
I'd say in the interest of time, we move on to, I guess, Sean Clements.
Chairs. Yeah, Chair Halleck, members of the board, and Director Taylor, really appreciate the opportunity or the invite to be here today. Carla, can you please pull up the slides we have? Just pulled up a few things to share our perspective on this issue. Obviously, water is really important to fish, so it's really important to us, and we recognize that there's shortages of water out there, and so this is just kind of sharing our perspective on the planning process. Next slide. So our mission really is to ensure that fish and wildlife have a home in Oregon for generations to come, that Oregonians can continue to use and enjoy them. Next slide. Fishing is also one of the 6 F's of Oregon agriculture, really important to our economy, bringing in close to $600 million a year in Oregon, all things considered. Next slide. As with land-based agriculture, the foundation of these healthy fish and wildlife populations really is the environment they live in, the habitat. And the foundation of good habitat really for fish is water, available water at the appropriate times. Next slide. But as I think you're all familiar with, water is a limited resource. Picture on the left being water available for allocation in summer. Picture on the right being water available for allocation in winter. There really is no available water except in a couple of locations in summer, which is really a key time for a lot of our fish populations. In terms of the juveniles, we're going to make it through that period. And increasingly so. I think we're looking at another year like 2015, and in 2015, several of our populations had challenges making it through the summer, and we've seen kind of the outcomes of that in poor returns in recent years. Next slide. One of the other challenges I think you're all aware of is that climate and ocean are changing. Next slide. And what that's doing for fish and wildlife really is undermining the ability of the habitat to support them. So there's a picture of Deer Creek in the Rogue Valley in 2015. We're seeing more incidences of streams drying earlier. And this is really having an impact on our fish populations. Next slide. So our goal really is to ensure that fish and wildlife have the water they need to support these healthy populations and provide the social, economic, and cultural benefits that they can support. Next slide. The several challenges around this. One of the main ones being that in-stream values have really been overlooked for a long period of time. So the majority of water in the state was claimed in the early 1900s. It wasn't until '87 when in-stream values were even recognized with the passage of the In-Stream Water Rights Act. And to date, ODFW is one of 3 agencies that can apply for in-stream water rights. And to date, I think about 15% of the streams in Oregon have some kind of in-stream water right. Typically, when ODFW applies for those rights, they're protested. So there's a lot of challenges involved here. Next slide. So in terms of the planning tools that are available, Doug really covered these pretty well. So place-based planning really is in our view at least, the best tool in the toolbox. There is no new water, so what we really need to sit around the table and discuss how we're going to use existing water in a balanced way. In terms of water conservation and modernization, the governor has a 100-year water vision funding strategy. There's potentially new money coming online through the federal government. It's really about putting that money to use on prioritizing projects that have multiple benefits. And for fish, ensuring that water actually goes back into the stream at the times they need it. Next slide. Other tools, in-stream water rights, we talked about those a little bit. They're typically junior in status, having been after 1987. So the actual protection value there is pretty limited. It does protect against some future use, but in most cases, they're so junior that it's not resulting in good water. Reservations, I think Doug outlined really well the kind of pros and cons there. In places where reservations are existing, we're typically not meeting in-stream water right values already, and so there'll be challenges in exercising the rights of those reservations just because we're not meeting those in-stream flows already. Next slide. So for our part, recognizing that water is so limited, it's going to be even more challenging in the future. We feel that we really need to focus our efforts in certain locations where habitat's going to be resilient for fish. And so we're developing a tool to identify those places where we really need to ensure that sufficient water stays in streams to support these populations, but areas where we could potentially accept more risk in exchange for protections in those areas. That's something that we're developing here soon and could be useful in these place-based planning conversations. So we also have Danette Fosera, who's our senior policy analyst in the water program, available today if you have any kind of questions about this. But that's just our perspective on things, and happy to take any questions.
Excellent. Yeah, I think we'll move on to Smita Mehta, and we'll see, I guess, where we come towards the end there, about 10:30. I'm going to guess we might come right up to the end, but We'll see if we have time for many questions there at the end of this presentation. Brian Harper for the record.
Thanks, commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Smitha Metha. I am a TMDL Basin Coordinator for DEQ. And prior to this, I was one of 3 DEQ staff involved in implementing Oregon's Integrated Water Resources Strategy. As you likely know, DEQ's mission is to be a leader in restoring, maintaining, and enhancing the quality of Oregon's air, land, and water. Our water quality goal is to protect and improve Oregon's water quality to keep our streams and lakes safe for beneficial uses, such as drinking water, fish habitat, recreation, and irrigation. To achieve this goal, DEQ develops and implements water quality standards and clean water plans. We regulate sewage treatment systems and industrial dischargers. We collect and evaluate water quality data. We provide grants and technical assistance to reduce non-point source pollution. And we provide loans to communities to build treatment facilities. So today's discussion is on water supply planning, and I've been asked to talk about DEQ's perspective on water supply planning tools in Oregon. But first, I just wanted to mention that water quality can be degraded in 2 ways. It can be degraded by pollution inputs, but it can also be degraded by significant alterations in stream flow. For example, significant reductions in stream flow can concentrate pollutants, and significant augmentation of stream flow can scour stream channels and increase turbidity. So this is why DEQ has a stake in water supply planning. So Oregon does have several state programs that can increase water supply for agriculture while also improving and protecting and maintaining water quality in stream. So for example, ag reservations of water. So these are the water rights with early priority dates that are set aside for future agricultural economic development. By rule, DEQ participates in the review of these water right applications to ensure the protection of water quality for in-stream beneficial uses. And like others have mentioned, this program does have some issues. Reserved water has not been applied for very often, and water supply is generally limited across the state, except in winter when water can be stored. But private storage facilities are expensive to build. And there are other programs that may be more successful in increasing agricultural water supply and protecting and improving water quality. And like others have mentioned, place-based planning is one of those, as well as other collaborative group processes. The place-based planning program is a water resources program funded by Water Resources. It uses a stepwise process to bring a community together to identify their water supply needs and create win-win solutions across all interests and prioritize projects for development. So there are currently 4 pilot projects in the state, and they are in their last phases of formulating their community water supply plans. Projects that are likely to come out of these planning processes include the building of new storage facilities. So these types of storage developed out of this place-based planning process are more likely to actually be built. They're more likely to get support from public funding because of their broad local support and because they meet multiple water supply needs. So for example, a new storage facility can meet the irrigation needs by releasing more water during the irrigation season, but it may also release more water in the heat of summer to improve water quality, and it may also release water in the spring or fall to provide fish habitat. So studies and plans developed through the place-based planning process can also fulfill DEQ's TMDL requirements, such as the creation of a watershed-based plan. Other programs that can be incorporated into these place-based plans include Oregon's feasibility study grant program, Oregon's water project grant and loan program, and DEQ's Clean Water State Revolving Fund loan program. These funding programs support the construction of these multi-stakeholder projects that provide these multiple benefits, such as the ones developed out of the place-based planning group processes. Another state program includes the the Conserved Water Act. With this program, farmers can conserve water on farm and then add a portion of that saved water to increase their water rights. Another portion of this conserved water is dedicated in stream, which improves water quality. And lastly, a couple other programs that help with water supply are OWEB's grant programs and DEQ's 319 grant programs. These two programs support projects on individual private properties, and property owners can use these funds to implement on-farm hydrology restoration projects, such as raising groundwater levels and restoring natural flow and retention on site. So higher groundwater levels and increased natural storage reduce irrigation needs and also improve water quality by increasing summer stream flow. So in summary, Oregon has these several programs that both increase agricultural water supply and help meet other state goals, including the protecting, maintaining, and improving of water quality. These implementation projects that improve water quality also help watersheds achieve DEQ's TMDL targets and can also result in streams being taken off the 303D list of impaired water bodies. So thanks, I can take questions now or later.
Brian Harper for the record. Thank you, Smitha. We'll take questions later, and we're going to move on to Mary Ann Cooper.
Good morning. Thank you all for having me. For the record, I am Mary Ann Cooper, here today with the Oregon Farm Bureau Federation. And I will say, hopefully you all can hear me okay, because what I sacrifice in looking cool with this headset, hopefully I make up for in you'll being able to hear me clearly. So here today to talk a little bit about long-term water supply planning, but with, I think, a specific focus to at least Oregon Farm Bureau's view of ways that we'd like the State Department of Agriculture to engage in that discussion, as well as kind of where we'd like to see the state heading long-term. So the availability of water for future economic needs has long been at the forefront of our members' thoughts. With long-term projections of drought, it's critical that the state ensure a reliable water supply to help feed our growing nation and growing world. Agriculture represents a vital part of Oregon's economy, and ensuring long-term availability of water is very important in ensuring that our second largest industry sector can continue to produce food and fiber. So you heard a little bit from both ODA, actually ODA, ODF&W, and ODBRD about how the Oregon legislature has authorized reservations of water for future economic development. And the creation of those water reservations was actually part of the same legislation that allowed for the establishment of in-stream water rights. And those reservations were intended to be a corollary to the in-stream water rights and designed to ensure that water is reserved for future economic growth when permanent in-stream water rights were created that often effectively take the rest of the available water supply. That statute allows for any local government, watershed council, or state agency to request those reservations of unappropriated water for multi-purpose storage for future economic development. So as Doug mentioned, we have seen some of those historically. There was a big round of them done in the 90s, kind of around the time that the first in-stream water right applications were made. And then quite frankly, I think that both stakeholders and agencies somewhat forgot that they existed as 20 years passed. And quite frankly, it was a 20-year period where there wasn't a tremendous amount of investment in water supply development. I don't think water long-term planning was quite as on the forefront of everyone's mind as it is now. And so it was really kind of with the integrated water resources strategy passing and looking toward implementation of that positions came back in the departments that were looking at both reservations and in-stream water rights as a tool for water supply protection and planning for the first time in 20 plus years. So for us, that's kind of when I got re-engaged in the conversation, and I think across the ag sector, where we kind of realized, oh, hey, there's these reservations that are available that can hopefully help us deal with the fact that, as others indicated, in most basins, there's not available water, and that planning for the future consumptive use really isn't occurring at a meaningful level in a lot of basins. So I guess for me, the kind of bigger request that we have here is we're looking toward the next round of in-stream water right applications, which are already taking place. I think there's 3 basins where ODF&W has already applied for in-stream water rights in the last 2 years. We are hoping that ODA can look toward using reservations as a tool in certain basins where we do have a need for potentially long-term growth, as a potential tool for just making sure that there is some water available to preserve the ability to have those conversations and do the level of planning that a lot of the agencies we're talking about that different programs allow. So for us, I think one of our concerns has been, since the in-stream water rights began to be pursued in the last 5 years again, there really hasn't been talk of pursuing reservations and figuring out where those are needed, and how we might look at what future water needs, out of stream water needs, are going to look like. I want to say, in saying that, we absolutely recognize that planning for in-stream and out-of-stream needs are both very critical, and we cannot do one without the other. And I do want to note these reservations are for multi-purpose storage. So in kind of any iteration that I have seen of folks looking at how we might develop reserved water in the future, there has absolutely been particularly stream augmentation for in-stream flows as part of those considerations. But I think for us, we're a little bit worried that if the in-stream piece continues to march forward as it has the last 3 years, without any consideration for that broader basin planning, what else is needed in the basin, how to meet everyone's needs, we will end up effectively appropriating even all of the winter water in the state in a way that's really not going to easily allow for long-term planning to then occur in the future. So that is, I think, what I wanted to convey to you all in this conversation, is where we'd like to see the board engages to really encourage the department to pursue more reservations and to kind of embrace their role in engaging for the agricultural community in long-term planning, so that we make sure that we are planning for all needs and we're not letting any single need and pursuing water rights for that need get out ahead of the rest. So with that, I will conclude and pass it off to April.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Vice Chair Harper, other members of the Board of Agriculture, Director Taylor, and guests. For the record, I'm April Snell. I'm the Executive Director of the Oregon Water Resources Congress. And just in a brief 101, OWRC for shorthand is a nonprofit trade association that represents irrigation districts and similar agricultural water suppliers around the state. Our members are water stewards of the water rights that they manage and deliver to farmers, ranchers, and nurserymen all over the state who provide a bounty of agricultural products. Our members, as far as making sure that the farmers, ranchers, and nurserymen have water, they are responsible for managing a complex set of infrastructure that varies depending on where they are in the state and whether they were created as part of a federal Bureau of Reclamation project or whether they were created as a group of private farmers who came together. Some of these districts operate or otherwise manage water supply reservoirs, while others do not. Many of them have pipelines, canals. They operate fish screens, fish passage, and all sorts of different infrastructure that's responsible for and necessary for getting water to the farm and other point of delivery. So as you've heard from the other speakers, including the fantastic folks from Water Resources Department, DEQ, and Fish and Wildlife, there is a set of existing reservations, and this process is a little complicated and a little archaic, as you heard from Marianne. And I think that while the way that it has been not used the last few years would make it seem like it is not a valuable tool, that's actually quite the opposite. And as you heard from some of the other speakers, there are efforts underway, including interest from several of our district members in exploring existing reservations and whether those can be developed in a way that meets not only agricultural needs, but also fish and wildlife and community needs. I think it's exceptionally important that we look to not only the water needs that we have in front of us today, but the water needs that we are going to see in the future. And as we move forward in looking at the effects from climate change, in many parts of Oregon, snowpack is our natural water storage. And as that snowpack is diminishing and not being replenished in the way that it has been more historically, we need to ensure that as a state, we are looking at multi-purpose storage projects and using reservations as one of the tools to ensure that not only are we meeting the needs of farmers and ranchers so that they can continue to grow valuable food and fiber and other products, but also to be able to release water, as you heard from the other speakers, when fish and wildlife need it, and as well as helping with water quality issues. If we don't have nature providing water when we need it and where we need it, it's important that we're looking as a state to find innovative ways to develop storage in ways that works for today's needs and tomorrow's needs. Our irrigation districts and similar ag water suppliers are actively looking at how they can maximize every drop of water that they have through various irrigation modernization efforts. Primarily, this is done through piping of otherwise open canals, which provides water efficiency, water conservation benefits, as well as providing in-stream benefits as well. But there are also things that are needed beyond piping, and that includes not only enhancing existing fish screens and fish passage infrastructure, but also working collaboratively with communities and other interests to look at innovative, primarily off-channel storage that can help meet a variety of water needs around the state. So in closing, the other thing that I will mention is irrigation districts are actively involved in whatever planning activities they are able to participate in locally. As you heard from other speakers, place-based planning is currently a pilot program, and that is not something that's available statewide. But there are a variety of other planning activities through local soil and water conservation districts, watershed councils, and then Bureau of Reclamation has funded some basin studies that our districts have participated in as well. But it is a missing component where we're not having a statewide structure that allows for better support of these funding efforts. But I will say, of the tools that have been brought before you, reservations is an important one to keep alive, and one that not only has import as far as the existing reservations, but as we move forward, looking at other places in the state that could benefit from a reservation that would help, hopefully, work with efforts by ODF and W on in-stream water rights, where these things could be done more collaboratively and with less friction, conflict, and protest. So recognizing that we are getting short on time, I will wrap up my comments here and hand off the baton to Mr. Stone. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, Jeff Stone, I serve as the Executive Director of the Oregon Association of Nurseries. Just as a reminder, nursery and greenhouse sector is our #1 sector of ag. Over $1 billion now. We've recapped that side. And we've actually, with the pandemic, surprisingly, people have rediscovered gardening. And so that is a good thing. But what you're talking about, you've almost made it all the way through talking about water. I commend you. It gives you glaze over right away. But I'm going to take you in a couple different directions, try to make this not as difficult of a thing, and keep to your time, Mr. Chair. Water, though, makes land use look like a walk in the park. It is very feisty. There's lots of, as you've heard from the previous speakers, there's lots of laws going back to 1909. Then we have the prior appropriations, so people who are first in, who have the water right are first in line, first in right. And so all those things are cornerstones of how we do production agriculture in the state. I would also say that this is going to be a tough conversation, and I am encouraged by you bringing in other agencies, because bad news doesn't get better with time, right? So let's get at some of these issues, and I'm going to cover a couple of them for you this morning. You heard Mary Ann talk about future basin, the basins. There are a lot of basins that need to have agriculture at the table. I look at in particular the Willamette and the Willamette reallocation that's going to be happening. Those are the 13 dams, federal dams that are really the last wet water available in the Willamette Valley. Candidly, agriculture got the short end of that stick. But the fact is that we can't look at water as a zero-sum game. And so, in fact, you have Mary Ann and you have April and myself. We joined with municipalities and with the moderate conservation groups to really talk about these issues, because a water war is the last thing that we need. And so looking at these basins, doing the proper planning for these basins, having the reservation process that you've heard numerous people talk about is important. And why is it important? There's a 10x economic benefit by putting water in play. So how you do your products, how you grow, what you grow can be vastly improved with the advent of water availability. I'd also state that I don't think ag gets enough credit for the efficiencies that they do already. I'd like to remind this group that if you are if the nursery industry has a lot of water reuse through ponds, we're able to use the water 7 times over before it goes back into the stream. That helps fish. That helps cities. And so while, yes, we use a lot of the water, we also have put in place a lot of efficiencies. And the development of water, I mean, I go to like Angus Young, the great poet and philosopher from AC/DC, and he goes, dirty deeds are done dirt cheap. No, man, water is expensive. People are provincial. Infrastructure makes people just go, ugh, because they don't see the immediate turn the tap. It takes time, not only for new water, but also for the existing water conveyance systems that we have today. And so there was a bill in 2013 that the coalition that I just talked to you about, the Farm Bureau, the nurseries, the Water Resources Congress, along with conservation and munis, came up with a bill that was the first of the state's water supply bill, Senate Bill 839, passed in 2013. And it was really meant to try to put conservation at the forefront, to try to put community interests in the forefront, and also the protection of ag, so we could make use of the changing environment. So less snowpack means that the water runs on by during rain. So how do we get at that? Well, I will say, the legislation was worth passing. I would say that it's not fulfilled its true mission yet, having storage available. I mean, we've done a lot on efficiencies and conservation measures, the things that are, achievable and important, but it has not received what we designed as a true water storage bill. And so we're going to take that thing under the hood. We're going to look under the hood and refit that thing. I'd love to come back and report to you and get your feedback about how we can make it best for ag. And so I'll end with this, Mr. Chair, and I know that you're going to be very thankful that I end. This is an important issue for ag to be at the table. My members know that there's a whole bunch of issues. There's a whole bunch of bills floating around in the legislature to which we're deeply involved, not because it impacts the nurseries per se, but it impacts ag. And if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So I'll end there, and happy to have any of my colleagues answer any questions, but you have a very coordinated and focused ag lobby, and I'm proud to be a part of them. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jeff. We got about 5 minutes. Are there any questions from the board? Brian Harper for the record.
Other AC/DC songs you'd like me to throw out there, Mr. Chair?
Always.
For the record, Elaine Miller. Many of our speakers talked about making sure ag was at the table. Jeff, you just repeated that. And I guess, you know, new to this and new to understanding all the ramifications and the complications, what can we as a Board of Ag do specifically to ensure that ag is at the table?
Okay, I don't see any of my colleagues answering, so I'll go ahead and take the first shot. And thank you, Elin, for the question. There are lots of dotted lines about who has authority over which part of water policy. So you have Water Resources Department with some part, you have DEQ with water quality, you have the ag water quality, and also ag water within the purview of the Department of Ag. And I think that as we move along with common goals, the Department of Ag needs to make sure that its stake in that tent remains. Because who knows better about how to do things on the ground than you? I mean, we put in the community interest part well before with the storage bill, well before its current heightened sense that we have right now, because we want to make sure that communities were taken care of. So this board can seek information. Let's seek common ground. But if we don't have the ag perspective, it's a lot easier just to say, oh, that's just flat land, and you know, we don't need to pay attention to it. I'd love to hear from my colleagues if they have anything else to add.
Well, I'll jump in, and of course I disagree with everything Mr. Stone said. No, just kidding. For the record, April Snell with Oregon Water Resources Congress. I agree with what Mr. Stone said, but would also add, you know, where there are opportunities for the department to have an active seat at the table, I think it's important that that occurs. Obviously, with the integrated water resources strategy, there's a built-in opportunity there, but other types of opportunities. So for example, if there are other types of place-based planning activities or other local, regional, basin level planning efforts, it's important to have ODA at the table. And there's only one Stephanie, and I think, you know, we do recognize the resource limitations, and frankly, that's not your guys's fault, but it is something where, to the extent that stakeholders like ourselves can be helpful in elevating those budget requests to the legislature and getting additional resources, it's something that we're very much committed to doing, but it's also something where I think it's not always necessarily understood.
I don't think that's realistic.
Outside of
at least for our industries, that's not realistic.
Sorry, I don't know who else is
I
talking.
I hope that we're changing our methodology a little bit.
John, it looks like you popped out. You
going out there at higher prices and having
Sorry, it's hard to talk over other folks. So just in wrapping up there, it's not always clear to folks outside of agriculture why ODA needs to be at the table, or often in some of these conversations around water quality, for example, there's not always that, oh, yes, we should have ODA at the table. There should be some discussion about the ag water quality program and how does that fit in to this larger effort. And so I think there is a need for additional resources and a need for additional coordination, but also there should be, in most of these discussions, my opinion is it's going to work better when you have all the natural resources agencies at the table specific to water, so that you can have some of these complex discussions together and try and work out some solutions. And so I also think that it's something where we'll see what comes out of this legislature as far as funding and directives, but there is going to be the update of the IWRS coming up, and hopefully that will afford some opportunities for both ODA as well as members of the Board of Ag to become actively engaged in however that revision process unfolds. Thank you.
And this is Marion Cooper. Since I see we only have 1 more minute, I will be incredibly brief in this. But just wanted to point out, one of my mentors in the water law world was Martha Pagel, who was the former director of the Water Resources Commission. She has since passed away, but I remember when we were talking about a lot of these topics, you know, she said back in the 90s when I was in charge, we set up a lot of things for ODA to be the voice for agriculture at the table, whether it's Division 33 review, as April and Jeff said, participation in processes. And I think with losing positions, that's fallen away a little bit. And I don't know that ODA has viewed itself as, you know, needing to be the advocate for ag water supply. And I think we would just love to see a return to, that was kind of how the system was designed and functioned. And we'd love to see them, you know, embracing that role, including pursuing additional reservations and just making sure that everybody in the water sphere knows what ag needs to be successful long term. 10:30 on the dot, so I'll stop.
Excellent. Thanks, you guys. Looks like 10. Yeah, we're at public comment now, and looks like we have 3 speakers today. Let's see. Yeah, we have Greg Holmes and Jennifer Ewer and Samantha Bayer, and we will be starting with Greg Holmes. Carla, how long are we going to give them so they kind of have a reference? You're going to use the whole half hour?
We have stated between 3 and 5 minutes, so we'll go 3 and no longer than 5.
Excellent. All right. Okay, well, we're going to start with Greg Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I be heard? Yes, okay, great. Thank you, Vice Chair Harper, members of the board, Director Taylor. My name is Greg Holmes. I am the Food Systems Program Director for 1000 Friends of Oregon. Part of our mission is protecting farmland so that it remains available for agricultural production. In 2015, we established our Food Systems Program, which is working directly with partners across the state, trying to help farmers be successful in the business of agriculture with the goal of reducing the pressure that some of them face to convert land to other uses for financial reasons. I'm here today to encourage you to adopt the proposed language for Resolution 314. It's a little bit awkward addressing you this topic before you're presented with the resolution, but I did listen in last night to the subcommittee and the discussion they had, so I can anticipate a couple of issues that might come up. And the things that I wanted to just mention is, you know, what this is and what this is not about. The proposed resolution for you is not about restricting legitimate agricultural related uses on farmland. It's very clearly about restricting non-farm uses that often conflict with agriculture and often result in land being taken out of production and sometimes spread beyond the land that they're permitted on and affect the ability of neighbors to farm. Those of you who've been around for a while might remember last fall I was part of a panel discussion with Board Member Johnson, Nellie McAdams, the American Farmland Trust, where I presented our report, Death by 1,000 Cuts, which goes into a lot of detail about all of the uses that are allowed on farmland and how many of the non-farm related uses impact agriculture. I'm happy to discuss that more at any point. This is also not a significant change in policy. The red line version that you're presented with looks pretty scary, but most of it's really about moving things around and about clarifying. It's providing better language, including more examples of the types of non-farm uses that we're talking about here. It's clear that the intent was to clarify, and it is clear, and its clarity is just in everybody's best interest. So I did submit a letter that included a recommendation to include some language about the importance of non-high value land. I believe that that's consistent with the intent and the meaning of the resolution. And I'll just note that that goes into the background section, so it doesn't actually change the language of the resolution itself. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that or anything else, but I respectfully encourage you all to adopt the language as it's presented to you this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. We're going to move on to Jennifer Ewer.
Jennifer, you're still muted.
I apologize for that. Am I okay now?
Yep, we can hear you. No worries.
Okay. So I would also like to talk about commercial uses and non-ag uses on ag land. And a lot of things have already been discussed. I know that there's pressure for people to have commercial uses on agricultural land. I've been farming for my whole career, and counting on the Oregon land use system to follow through with what it was originally intended for, which was to protect resource land. And I'd like to talk about the effect that the commercial uses and the non-ag uses have. There's a lot of talk about whether or not the impact on the price of land is a legitimate is legitimately something that affects the ability to farm. And we also are more concerned these days about having people who are young farmers, new farmers, farmers of diverse backgrounds being able to get into farming. For those reasons, I think it's very, very important that we keep the price of farmland. We do what we can to keep the price of farmland at a level that people can afford to get into. And it's already terribly expensive. And when you take land that people bought once upon a time for agricultural prices, and they change it to a commercial use. If that commercial use has a permit and that piece of land eventually gets sold, the price of that land is going to reflect that added commercial use. There's really no way to get around that. And we can say that the permits don't go with the land, but in essence, if one person got a permit, it's hard to argue the next person should not. And every time that happens, the value of that land and what the owner expects to get to for it goes up, and it becomes much more difficult for anybody starting to get into farming to be able to afford any of this land. The land next door does the same thing. If my neighbor can have a commercial permit, then why can't I have a commercial permit? And so each person, when they sell their land, expects this extra money for a commercial use. Meanwhile, in our small towns, the people who did pay commercial prices to buy commercial land are competing with what become virtual restaurants in the ag zone. And so people who paid a great deal more for their commercial land are being competed with in a way that I believe is unfair, and they paid more for that land. So I think for those two reasons, we need to be very careful about what we allow to happen on ag land. And just because it's ag related or can be said to have been ag related does not mean that it is not harming the future of that land and future land around it for beginning farmers to get into. And to the extent that we want people of diverse backgrounds and people who are beginning in farming and people who are not terribly wealthy to begin with to get into farming, I think this is a huge issue. In my area, it's a very huge issue because people cannot afford this land because of all the uses that have been allowed on it. And so I know there's a lot of other things to address in terms of commercial uses, but the cost, what it does to the price of farmland, I think really impacts our future of trying to have a more diverse look to the farmer in Oregon. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Next is Samantha Baer.
Chair Harper, members of the committee, can you all see me and hear me fine?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comment today on Resolution 314. For the record, my name is Samantha Baer. I'm Policy Counsel for the Oregon Farm Bureau, which is the state's largest agricultural trade association, representing nearly 7,000 farm and ranch families from across the state. We have submitted a letter about this resolution, which should be in your packet, essentially asking the board to postpone discussion of this issue until the pandemic ends. I wanted to come before you today to provide some context for our letter and a lack of a clear position on this resolution. This issue, land use broadly and non-farm uses as they are categorized in the resolution, is a controversial issue within the industry and OFB's own membership. In our eyes, this resolution paints all of those uses with a single brush, treating those uses like they are all separate from agricultural operations. Not all of our members agree with this approach, especially those who rely on agritourism, have integrated facilities, or rely on commercial activities in conjunction with farm use to actually stay in business and stay involved in agriculture. We have been trying to bring our membership together to discuss this issue more broadly. We have a policy on commercial activities in the farm zone, and we have policies on farm direct or agritourism and the importance of on-farm processing, but nothing that gets squarely at the heart of the issue, which is that, yes, there can be land use impacts on agriculture from other uses in the farm zone, but some of those other uses may ultimately be supporting agriculture, or may be the only way that farmers have enough income to expand the actual more conventional agricultural side of their operations. We haven't been able to have that robust discussion because of COVID-19, and it was really important to our leadership that that conversation take place in person because it's such a big deal for our membership. So we don't know where our members stand exactly on this issue because, like I said, we don't have direct policy on it, and we haven't been able to bring our members together in person. We believe this conversation is very complicated, and for those reasons, we want to take this conversation very carefully and very thoughtfully and make sure that all voices are heard. We are concerned that the policy stated in the base resolution and the proposed amendments does not reflect where our members and the agricultural community is at as a whole, and may overtly paint with too broad of a brush how individuals feel about non-farm uses in the farm zone. So for those reasons, we encourage you not to move forward with reaffirming this resolution at this point or the subsequent amendments, and wait so that our members and the broader agricultural community can have more in-depth and in-person discussions on this issue. And that's all I have, and I'm happy to answer any questions you guys may have.
Thank you, Samantha. Let's see here. Well, I guess we're about 15, well, a little more than that, minutes ahead. I guess if y'all are comfortable, we usually have a break, but I guess probably wouldn't hurt, just keep on rolling. So we have Jim Johnson leading the next agenda item, agricultural land use discussion with the Department of Land Conservation Development. With him, we have Jim Rue and Hillary Foote.
I think we need to make sure, since we are a little ahead of schedule, that Director Rue and Hillary Foote are.
No, we're here, Alexis. We have me, Jim Rue, Gordon Howard, and Hillary. I'm just struggling to come on camera, and I don't think I know how to use this program.
Maybe that's a good thing, Jim. No.
It's always a good thing, Jim. Thanks so much for bringing that up.
Yeah. While you're struggling to find that, let me give an introduction to this, and then we can get moving, if that's okay with Chair Harper. Jim Johnson, for the record, by the way.
Go for it, Jim.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brian. For the record, I'm Jim Johnson. I'm the Land Use and Water Planning Coordinator for the Oregon Department of Agriculture. I just wanted to give a quick introduction to this topic and then introduce our friends from DLCD that are here. I have a real special place in my heart for DLCD. Worked there for 5 years before I came on to ODA. Not to say that DLCD is a bad place, it's just ODA is a better place. But anyways, real quick too, in an introduction to land use, it was interesting that Jeff Stone said that water law was a walk in the park, or land use was a walk in the park compared to water law. Well, we can talk about that all we want. I work in both areas, and neither one is, something that is not controversial or the like. But really quickly, just to talk about or the Oregon Land Use Planning Program, and I'm not going to get into a lot of details. I think that's a bigger discussion. But we're a year or two short of the 50th anniversary of the Oregon Land Use Planning Program. It's been a very integral part of Oregon, and an integral part of the Oregon Planning Program is the protection of farmland. There's approximately 15.9 million acres of land in Oregon in farm use, and of that, about 15.5 million are actually inventoried and protected as farmland by the Oregon Planning Program. Real quickly, some of the key issues that we're dealing with in terms of land use in Oregon and farmland, and I'm not going to get into a lot of detail because I think that Hillary will get into a lot of these, but urban growth, of course, is always a big issue. Most of the urban growth boundaries in the state are getting close to their 20-year land supply. Remember, we've been at this for 50 years. Non-farm uses, anything from energy facility siting to recreational uses. We've heard a lot about rails to trails lately, for example, aggregate mining, the cumulative impact of all these on not only the implications of surrounding farms, but the conversion. Those are all issues. And then right to farm and coexistence, which is something that the planning program doesn't get at as much as maybe we could, but that's also a big part of what I do. So with that, I just want to introduce our panelists and let them take over. Of course, Director Jim Rue is a past member of the Board of Agriculture. He's third generation owner of farmland up in the Silverton Hills. It's interesting. He spent 2 terms on the Board of Agriculture, and some of you know him better than I do, and I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but Jim, welcome. Hillary Foote is my counterpart over at DLCD. She is the farm forest specialist for DLCD. I've known Hillary back to her days as a county planner at Tillamook County, where we worked on a lot of issues along with Chad Allen, who's no neophyte to land use planning, by the way. Welcome, Chad. Hillary and her husband actually farm. They have their own operation called Nehalem River Ranch, where they do a real special and livestock business dealing with cattle and hogs. And they're really big into the local food scene. So she's really, involved not only in agriculture from the policy side, but also on the ground. And I just wanted to introduce Gordon Howard. I don't know if Gordon's going to speak today or not. He's not on the list, but Gordon is the manager of the rural planning section at DLCD and somebody that I go to a lot to discuss policy issues. So for that, Jim, I'm going to let you introduce and take off with your staff, however you want to work.
Well, thank you. And thank you to all of you for making some time for us to spend with you this morning. I caught the tail end of some of the public comment session, and I think that Hillary's presentation is going to put some numbers around a lot of what you've been hearing. Every 2 years, we're required by law to do a farm forest report and submit it to the legislature. So I think we're in an off year now, Hillary. My memory is that you presented to Land Conservation Development Commission about a year ago. on the Farm Forest Report, but it is continuously updated. Hillary does an extraordinary job of tracking conversions from rural to urban uses, as well as some of the drivers that are behind those conversions. So with that, I'm going to stop. Hillary's presentation, I think, is about a half an hour. That should leave us some time for conversation afterwards. And Hillary, it's all yours. Thank you.
Great. Can everyone hear me? I feel like my mic is not working.
You're good, Hillary.
Okay, great. I just can't hear myself. And do we have our presentation up? I'm not seeing it. Perfect. Great. And then Carla, are you going to advance the slides? Okay. So good morning, and thank you again for inviting us here today. So I am Hillary Foote, the Farm Forest Specialist for the Department of Land Conservation and Development. And thank you, Jim, for that great introduction. It's really fun actually to be here this morning working with both Jim and Chad again. So I understand that we were invited here to provide a brief background on the agricultural land use program and provide some comments on the current status. So to that end, over the next 30 minutes or so, I'll provide a little bit on the agricultural lands or Goal 3 program and its history, how it's structured, and then go over some highlights from our recent biennial report to the legislature. And then hopefully we'll have some time for questions at the end. All right, next slide. So a bit of background for context. So DLCD, or Department of Land Conservation and Development, is a very small state agency, and we work in partnership with local governments and other state and federal agencies to address the land use needs of the public. So many folks here are aware that in the early 70s, the legislature adopted governance establishing 19 statewide planning goals that are related to a variety of development components and land types. And these 19 goals are implemented through state statute and clarified in DLCD's administrative rules. At the local level, the statewide goals are reflected in county comprehensive plans and city plans, and the local land ordinances or zoning ordinances and land division ordinances that implement those local plans. So the history actually around Goal 3, the agricultural lands goal, is a little bit different from many of the other statewide planning goals, as the EFU, or exclusive farm use zone, was actually created in the early 60s, 10 years before everything else in the land use program. So the 1963 statutes actually included provisions allowing for the creation of EFU zones, including a definition of farm use and 5 allowable non-farm uses. But at that time, implementation of the EFU zone was optional, it was voluntary, and it was linked to an incentive special tax assessment program. And actually, that is how a number of states in the US manage farmland protection through sort of voluntary special assessment districts. So skip forward 10 years to Senate Bill 100, the well-known Land Conservation and Development Act that created LCDC and the structure for the land use planning system that we have now. In 1973, there was a partner bill, a farmland bill, that was Senate Bill 100. And that bill, which was partner to Senate Bill 100, was in large part a rewrite of that existing exclusive farm use portion of Chapter 215. And it established a 4-point legislative policy, which I could spend an hour talking about. But in sum, that 4-point policy calls for the preservation of the maximum amount of a limited supply of agricultural land in Oregon in order to protect and sustain our agricultural economy. So as a reflection of that policy, implementation of exclusive farm use zoning became mandatory across the state on lands that had been inventoried by counties as agricultural lands, and that special tax assessment program became an automatic compensatory tax program, compensatory in exchange for restrictions on development rights instead of an incentive program. So it kind of works like this. Counties inventory the lands, and where those lands met the definition of agricultural land and no exception was taken, restrictive exclusive farm use zoning was applied at the local level, and the property was automatically enrolled in a special assessment program as compensation for the restrictions on development rights imposed by those EFU zoning statutes and ordinances at the local level. So by the mid-1980s, all 36 of Oregon's counties had completed detailed inventories of their rural lands. 16.1 million acres was protected under exclusive farm use zoning. Those local zoning ordinances that reflect the state statute in Chapter 215. And then since that time, in almost every legislative session, there have been changes to those statutes that structure the Goal 3 program, particularly in the uses allowed. So in 1973, there were 6 non-farm uses that were allowed in statute, and now there are over 66. Okay, next slide. So as Director Rue mentioned, DLCD prepares an annual report or a biannual report to the legislature. In 1983, fairly early stage in the planning program, there was a growing concern about the consistency in the way the EFU standards in Chapter 215 were being applied across the state. So the legislature adopted provisions making it mandatory for counties to submit certain EFU permit decisions to a DLCD on an ongoing annual basis. And this is now accomplished through a restricted online interface with a robust data set that we maintain. And from that data, LCDC has a statutory obligation to review and analyze it, and then provide the legislature with a biennial farm and forest report prior to the start of every odd legislative year. So the most recent report was for the 2018-2019 biennium, and it was provided to the legislature just prior to the start of this session. The next report will be published in early January of 2023. Okay, next slide. So you can find that report on our farmland protection page, and I'm happy to circulate a link with the directions to that part of our website. And that report itself is divided into 6 main sections. Context, describing the Goal 3 and Goal 4 programs, their policy statements, how they're structured. And also in that report, we identified a few emerging issues, particularly climate and wildfire, and asked the questions of how they might relate to our program policies. Then we get into our statistical reporting obligation, the nitty-gritty details, number of dwellings, non-residential uses that have been permitted on protected working lands. And this is the part that statute tells us to do. So for the next few minutes, what I'm like to do is briefly touch on climate and Executive Order 20, and then go over some of the statistical highlights for development on EFU zones, and then open it up to questions. Next slide. And Director Rue, feel free to jump in if you like to add anything here. But for this presentation and this discussion, what I'd like to say here is that in our response to Executive Order 20, it has been important for DLC to highlight the role That's the goal 3 and goal 4. Goal 4 is the forest land protection program, both of which are essentially working lands preservation programs. The role that those programs play in maintaining resource lands for resource use, and particularly with forest and rangeland, in maintaining their capacity for carbon storage by preserving them for resource use. I would also like to note here, related to this topic, that our definition of agricultural lands and our definition of forest lands, as they're stated in the rule, are primarily based on NRCS soils classifications. There are other significant components of both definitions as well, but this is actually one of the unique features of Oregon's farmland protection system. The fact that it's based on objective scientific data, and not just the USD prime or unique classifications, which you see used in other states, but also on these regionally specific NRCS farmland capability classifications associated with certain soil series. And our program, particularly the Goal 3 program, is heavy references to these soils data and its varying definitions for high value farmland, in discussing agricultural land and appropriate for farm use, and in the definition of arable lands. So we are watching with a lot of interest how the thinking around soils evolves related to sequestration capability particularly, and how those conversations around soils might be integrated into the preservation program that we manage. All right, next slide. Okay, we'll start into the nitty-gritty reporting details with dwellings. So what you're looking at here are dwelling approvals by type over a 25-year period starting in 1994. And there are really 3 different categories of dwellings that are allowed on land zoned for farm use. So there are those dwellings that are permitted in conjunction with farm use. So dwellings for primary farm operators and their help. Then there are those non-farm dwellings. So there's 2 different types of non-farm dwellings that, these are dwellings that require some sort of a determination that farm use is generally unsuitable for the property is generally unsuitable for farm use. And it requires a type of cumulative impacts analysis finding that the dwelling won't materially alter the stability of the overall land use pattern in the area. And then there's a 3rd type, which are dwellings that are not necessarily in conjunction with farm use, or they might be in conjunction with farm use, and those are replacement dwellings and hardship dwellings. Okay, so what you're looking at here in this 25-year trend essentially shows that these green and yellow dwelling types are dwellings in conjunction with farm use. And the orange there are non-farm dwellings. So historically, we have seen actually far more non-farm dwelling approvals on farm zones than dwellings in conjunction with farm use. And that trend, that proportion has held true over the 25-year period, with one exception, and that was after the 2008 recession, where you see that large dip in non-farm dwellings and replacement dwellings. Is those are 2 dwelling types that more closely align with traditional real estate markets, and you'll see rebounded a little bit more robustly following the recessionary period following 2008. All right, so that's a bit about dwellings. So next slide. And this is what that trend looks like across the state. So most overall dwelling approvals over 25 years have happened in Douglas, Deschutes, and Marion counties. And non-farm dwellings and replacement dwellings account for the bulk of dwellings, again, approved over that historical period. So everybody always asks about Douglas County because they stand out here. And on that point, I would say that prior to 2008, Douglas County had a very high number of average dwelling approvals per year, 120 dwellings a year. Following 2008, there was a significant decline in dwelling approvals in Douglas. It dropped to 50 a year. So, and that number has been declining in the county steadily over the past 10 years as well. And there's a shift in dwelling approvals in Douglas. And DLCD staff, before I started with the department, did do some audit of their non-farm dwelling approvals as well. Next slide, please. Related to non-farm dwelling approvals are soils capability challenges. And this is something I want to mention here because we've seen a rather anomalous trend in recent years. So as I mentioned earlier, NRCS soils capability classifications are interspersed throughout our rules and influence whether certain uses can be developed and how land is designated. So in 2011, House Bill, I think it was 3647, set standards for how site-specific detailed Order 1 soil survey reports could be used in land use proceedings instead of NRCS soils data. And it defined a role for DLCD in vetting the credentials of soil scientists, reviewing the content of those reports for consistency with what rule says has to be in those reports, facilitating periodic peer checking of work, and then releasing those to counties for uses basis of fact in land use proceedings. Typically, these are used to support non-farm dwelling applications and also zone changes, particularly to non-resource designations. Between 2012 and 2019, DLCD received an average of 14 of these types of applications to review a year. Last year, we received 34, more than double the number of reports. And we received 19 of these reports for review already this year. So I am noting this here as a significant change in a trend. And although you won't see this in the biennial report, I'm highlighting it as a trend that gives me pause and perhaps points to a need to take a deeper look at this aspect of the program. Okay, next slide, please. Now we're moving on to non-dwelling uses approved on EFU. So what we're looking at here is a summary of the top 5 uses that are approved in farm zones since 2009. There's an other category here that represents about 51%, and those are all of the other 61 uses that are allowed in the farm zone, which individually amount to less than 6% of the total approval. So that would be things like golf courses, which represent 0.03% of use approvals. The categories you see here on the slide are the big ones, and these represent the bulk of permits that cross county planning desks historically. So these are going to be home occupations, processing, commercial activities in conjunction with farm use, communications facilities, and solar. I've included communication facilities here, but the trend has been a significant decline over time, although they still represent a large historical use category. So I'm going to talk briefly about each one of these over the next couple of minutes. Home occupations, processing, commercial activities in conjunction with farm use, and solar, and we'll include a discussion of agritourism as they relate to those categories. Okay, so next slide. Okay. So home occupations are essentially a business that you run out of your house, and lots of different things get approved as home occupations. Hair salons, art galleries, cabinet making, lots of different things. Since 2008, roughly a quarter of home occupation approvals have been for bed and breakfasts, followed by contracting businesses at roughly 8%, and then a suite of uses in the 5 to 6% category that include wineries, cideries, tasting rooms, events venues, food production, things like bakeries, jams, and salsas being made at home, and then firearms dealerships. Most likely because ATF requires a land use statement for firearms dealers. And so a larger portion of those get actually permitted. So you'll notice here that a number of these things that get permitted as home occupations are also could be considered agritourism related. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit more later. All right, next slide. So the next two categories are processing and commercial activities in conjunction with farm use, which are also referred to by the acronym CACFU. So for processing prior to 2016, an average of 5.2 approvals per year for processing facilities was common. Okay, after 2016, that number jumped to an average of 33 approvals a year over the 4-year period, with 87% of those approvals being for the processing of marijuana and hemp. Okay. New legislation that was passed in 2019 now exempts processing facilities that are smaller than 2,500 square feet in processing area from standards like setbacks and parking requirements. So that is kind of important to note. For commercial activities in conjunction with farm use or CACFUs, the same trend is happening. So after 2017, we've seen a bit of a jump in these commercial activity approvals, with much of that bump coming from hemp processing facilities. In the 18-19 biennium, there were 67 hemp processing facilities approved as commercial activities in conjunction with farm use across the state. So this is a good example how a single activity, say making CBD oil, can be approved or permitted either as a processing facility or a commercial activity. There are multiple avenues for permitting different or the same use, depending on maybe some different characteristics that they have and how they can meet the criteria for those particular uses. One thing you'll also note on this slide is that in the CACFU pie chart, that yellow there, that is wineries. So 39% of commercial activities in conjunction with farm use were still for wineries. And keeping that in mind, I think, can we skip ahead 2 slides to the agritourism slide, Carla? One more. There we go. And we'll go back to solar in a minute. Because this idea that there are multiple avenues for permitting comes into play in this conversation. So agritourism is a tough topic. Agritourism allows visitors to experience and learn about Oregon agriculture. It provides additional income for farmers, and it has been dramatically growing in popularity over the past decade. In the 2017 USDA census, they reported over 16 million in 2017 revenue earned from Oregon agritourism and recreational services, which is likely significantly underreported. But that represented a 51% increase over the 2012 agritourism revenues that they reported. And if you read the Capitol Press on Friday, there was a headlining article there on the Hood River Fruit Loop that offered some pretty staggering estimates on the millions of dollars that are spent on agritourism, just in Hood River alone. That said, it is also a controversial topic with a lot of concern expressed around the potential impacts to neighboring farm operations from some of those activities. And I understand that this is a topic that your board is very familiar with since you reviewed a policy resolution on agritourism last year, where you had some of the concerns around uneven application by counties, lack of comprehensive definition, and perhaps a desire for codification of some case law around agritourism. So let me touch on those 3 points that maybe helps flesh out some of the issue with agritourism, from a land use perspective. So I think that the biggest stumbling block when we talk about agritourism is that folks who are talking about it often are talking about completely different things. Some people mean corn mazes and pony rides and farm stands. Other people mean wineries and breweries. And other people are talking about events venues as a primary use, or transient lodging development like cabin camps. So people are often not talking about the same thing when they talk about agritourism, because it could be a bunch of different things. We maintain a detailed matrix of all sorts of different uses that are permitted in the EFU zone that could be considered agritourism, and all of the different ways that they can be permitted. So that's really the second big issue, is that these different uses can be permitted through various permits. So we just looked at, CBD oil. Let's take, for example, wineries or cideries. So a cidery could be a home occupation, a guy making small batch cider out of his garage and selling it. A cidery could be a processing facility where a quarter, of the pears or apples are produced on site and then processed on site. A cidery could be permitted as a capital C cidery under ORS 215-451 if they're producing 1,000 gallons of cider. Or a cidery could be permitted as a commercial activity in conjunction with farm use if it can't meet the standards for a capital C cidery under 215-451. So there are, at least 4 pathways there for permitting a single activity, which is the production of cider. So that really complicates the conversation. In the chart that you're looking at here on this slide, I've sorted through the different ways these uses can be permitted and sort of aggregated or lumped them under their use umbrella. And what you'll see here is that when we're looking at agritourism approvals by volume since 2008, the majority of them have been for alcohol-related production and activities and events. So wineries, cideries, breweries, and tasting rooms. And then events are the next largest category, but it will be interesting to see how that trend continues over the next biennium. Okay. So the third issue that often comes up around agritourism is around implementation and lack of consistency across counties on implementation of permitting agritourism activities. So part of it is that there isn't a standard definition for agritourism. Part of it is that there is a number of different ways things can be permitted. And then actually a big part of that goes back to an intentional element of the land use planning system, which is to allow counties flexibility in implementing their comprehensive plan vision as long as it's consistent with statewide planning goals and the mandatory statutory provisions. So this is a really important thing. Some of the provisions in statute are mandatory and counties have to mirror what is in statute. So in the exclusive farm use zone, those uses that are allowed by right, like farm stands, the county ordinance should mirror what's in statute. Other uses are optional for counties to choose whether they want to adopt them into their ordinances or not. So for example, 215-283 sub 4 are the statutory provisions that would allow a county to adopt ordinances for agritourism events like farm to table dinners for like a 2-year period. Counties choose whether or not they want to adopt those into their ordinances, and there are many counties out there that have not elected to adopt those provisions into ordinance. And then for uses that are allowed conditionally, counties can adopt those into their ordinances or might have to adopt those in their ordinances, and they can choose to be more restrictive than what is set forth in statute if they choose. So for example, with guest ranches, there are criteria that set forth in statute for guest ranches, but a county may elect to add their own criteria or additional provisions and conditions in approving guest ranches if they want to. This is true for all uses, not just uses that might be considered agritourism. So really anyone who wants to develop any use in exclusive farm use zone or any other zone really should start with the local county planning department, and not just for the reasons I've mentioned here, but also because there are often locationally specific factors that influence what can be developed on a property that really don't have anything directly to do with the Goal 3 program. So those are things like sufficient emergency access, septic capacity, wetlands, floodplains, historic resources, or wildlife overlays. So it's a complicated topic with a lot of opinions and a lot of complexity. And DLCD remains very engaged in conversations around agritourism. And we work to provide education and any other type of support on the topic where we can. Okay. So Carly, could we go back to the first solar slide, 2 slides ago? Oh, down one more. There we go. So this is a big topic as well. So solar siting permits at the local level have increased dramatically since 2015, particularly in the Willamette Valley on high value farmland. In the 18-19 biennium, there were 63 approvals for solar farms. And it is very difficult for me to identify a single factor that contributes to the sharp increase. Oregon has a 50% renewable portfolio standard. Many of our regional investor-owned utilities have identified solar portfolios in their resource planning. There is a federal investment tax credit. In Oregon, we replaced our BETC, our business energy tax credit incentive, with a solar-specific development grant program, and the industry itself has matured over time, and so have storage technologies. So all of this comes together to result in a boom, a solar boom, if you will, in Oregon, kind of starting in 2015. You'll note on this graph that there is a bit of a dip in 2019. So in 2019, in the latter part of 18 and most of the beginning of 19, LCDC was engaged in a rulemaking that included a number of changes to our solar siting rules, but notably restricted the siting of solar facilities from mapped soil units that are NRCS Class 1 and 2, USDA Prime and Unique. So solar facilities under our new rules cannot be sited on Class 1, Class 2 Prime or Unique soils, mapped soil units, without taking a Goal 3 exception. So some of that decline in 2019 may have been related to uncertainty created while that rulemaking was ongoing. Those rules were adopted by LCDC in mid-2019. So I have not finished QCing the county reported data from 2020 yet. But that is one of the things that is high on my list to do, is look and see how the solar trends evolved over 2020. Okay. Next slide. On the topic of solar siting, another thing I think is really important to note is that energy facilities over a certain generating and acreage or acreage threshold have to be permitted through FSEC, the Energy Facility Site Council, which is housed within ODO. In 2019, there was legislation that lowered those thresholds, House Bill 2329, and also provided an opportunity for any wind or solar generator, even the smaller ones, to pursue permitting through FSEC instead of the local jurisdiction if they so desire. And this is important because although a generator being permitted through FSEC needs to demonstrate compliance with the local land use provisions, if a generator cannot comply with all of those standards, for example, wanting to site facilities on Class 1 or Class 2 soils, or USDA prime soils, FSEC has different criteria for taking an exception to statewide planning goal 3 than DLCD does. Their exception standards are more permissive than ours. So that is important to note. Since 2008, FSEC had issued 9 site certificate approvals or final orders for solar and wind projects involved in Goal 3 exceptions under their exception process. And as of last November, they had an additional, actually it's 7 projects under review that would require Goal 3 exceptions. So they've also noted an increase in the sort of number of facilities going through their permit review process as well. Where a land use decision for a solar review at the local level goes through LUBA and then Court of Appeals and Supreme Court, an order issued by FSEC is appealable directly to the state Supreme Court. Okay. So next slide. All right, last topic, conversion. So in 1987, there are 16.1 million acres in Oregon that were zoned for exclusive farm use. And DLCD's performance metric with regard to conversion is based on land rezoned out of exclusive farm use zoning. So on that metric, we have done a great job over the last 40 years. 99.8% of lands that were zoned for exclusive farm use in 1987 are still zoned for exclusive farm use today. When property is going through a permit process to be rezoned, that comes to DLCD, we review, we often comment. And I think the program has been very successful in that regard. So there's been a lot of conversation and growing concern over the past couple of years, particularly in farm advocacy communities, about trends in de facto conversion of farmland, even while it's maintained under productive resource zoning, to residential development and non-farm uses, right? And of course, the cumulative impact of that residential development and development of non-farm uses on the viability of the agricultural economy. And so the Farm and Forest report, provides data looking at permit approvals on those non-farm uses and those non-farm dwellings. And in this biennial Farm and Forest report, I also included a brief write-up on some other studies and reports out there to look at when thinking about conversion in Oregon. So one of those reports that's worth considering or taking a look at was issued last summer by the American Farmland Trust. It's called Farms Under Threat, State of the States, and it is actually a national attempt to spatially identify the impacts of large lot housing development on the agricultural land base. The USDA census for 2017 also has information on farm use at the county level. And then something I'd like to talk a little bit more about as well is our Department of Forestry, ODF, actually has a great, again, spatial coverage analysis called Forest, Farms, and People, and it's another land cover review. So all of these reports look at different conversion of resource lands over different time periods. So it's difficult to compare them. They have slightly different methodologies. And, they all tell slightly different stories as well. So next slide. So ODF actually performs this land cover review based on interpretation of aerial imagery. And they're looking at aerial imagery that's taken over at 8 different years during the period between 1974 and 2018. And based on review of that aerial imagery, they've categorized non-federal lands in Oregon into one of 5 resource land categories, dealing with wildland forest, wildland range, croplands, let's see, mixed forest ag, mixed range ag, and then low density residential and urban. And they've tracked those trends over time. So it's a really fun thing to look at. I would note that based on their review, they concluded that only slightly less agricultural land was retained in agricultural cover than was retained in EFU zoning over that 35-year period. So that analysis concludes that we've also done a pretty good job in Oregon of protecting our agricultural land base. One thing you'll notice in this graph here that they notice, not surprisingly, that more land has been retained in agricultural cover or forest cover, resource cover, working lands in Eastern Oregon than has been in Western Oregon. Not a big surprise. As noted in the American Farmland Trust analysis, the Department of Forestry work also concludes that of the land that's being converted out of resource use, more of it is being converted to rural residential use than to urban use. So I kind of want to refrain from conjecture about the forces driving that trend towards rural residential use. It might be a cultural preference for rural living enabled by technology. It might be affordability and availability of urban housing. On that last point, and Director Rue could probably speak to this far more eloquently than I can, but I just wanted to mention that DLCD has been doing really great work on urban housing supply over the past several years. And that work that's being done by the agency to improve the availability of urban housing supply and densities of urban housing stock could have a very positive effect on that trend, again, by increasing that urban housing stock. So I'm mentioning, these different studies as different data lenses through which we could look at the effectiveness of Oregon's Working Lands Protection Program, which is the Goal 3 and the Goal 4 land use program.
Hillary, can I interrupt? We're probably almost at time and need to wrap if we can, so that we still have a little bit of time for questions.
Yep, we are on our last slide, and the next slide is a thank you for listening. I'd encourage folks to go take a look at the biennial Farm and Forest Report. Again, it's available on our website. And Gordon, Director Rue, and I are happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Vice Chair Harper, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Yeah, I guess from the board are there any questions for Hillary after that very eloquent delivery?
I've got one question.
Yeah.
Hillary, since if we were able to take out some of the outright uses that are allowed in EFU zone now, like the creation and restoration of wetlands, that we know is a complete conversion of outside of the farm use, how do you think that would change that reduction of total acres that are available in EFU?
So if I understand your question correctly, if we took out acreage devoted to non-farm uses, how would that impact sort of the conversion assessment? So we have not tracked acreage of non-farm uses generally. We do track parcel sizes. We do track non-farm dwelling parcel sizes. So there's a tax implication with that use approval. So it's very difficult to answer your question about the acreage contribution of non-farm uses.
Yeah, I would think that, when we look at that number in terms of the total acres that were lost or are still available, it looks like we've done a great job, but I think that there's a significant amount of acres that are been out of any farm production and are for other non-farm uses, and are not able to be tracked. And so, it's a real number, and it's I think has grown pretty substantial probably in the last 20 years. So that would be interesting to see how, in the future we could come up with some ways of being able to track that, since they often don't require permits.
Could I respond to that?
Yeah, Jim.
Yeah, this is actually one of the issues that we're dealing with, and that is to get a handle on the cumulative impact of all these different uses in the exclusive farm use zone on the not only the footprint, the actual conversion of agricultural land, but the shadow conversion that they have as they cast out on adjacent lands and the like. And during public comment, one of the comments talked about land values and speculative land values and the like, and that's one of the issues in terms of the cumulative impacts and shadow conversion in agricultural land. So that gets to the whole idea of there needs to be a greater analysis of cumulative impacts.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and yeah, and that points to the concerns that are highlighted, for example, in the AFT report about that sort of de facto conversion while land remains in EFU zoning. And it is it's a daunting task that involves a lot of analysis, and I believe that there have been attempts to look at scoping such an effort in the past, and it would be quite a challenge.
All right, Barbara Boyer's got a question, or maybe 4.
Now that's surprising.
All right, where do I want to start? So I guess the non-farm dwelling, that is so not good for agriculture. And it was very shocking and a little disturbing to see those numbers and the trend that's happening. I really encourage you, as you stated, that you would like to take a deeper look into that. So I really encourage you to do that, please. Mm-hmm. So when there is a non-farm dwelling, does part of the farm come out of EFU and then they pay different property taxes?
So when a non-farm dwelling is approved, the parcel that it is located on is removed from the special tax assessment program, but the property is maintained under exclusive farm use zoning. So a non-farm dwelling approval does not change the zoning of the property, but it does change the tax benefit.
Okay, excellent, thank you. And then in your goal number 3, with 36 counties having different sets of approvals and criteria, how are you tracking that? That sounds like a big feat.
So, as we sort of touched on earlier in that discussion of agritourism, for exclusive farm use zone, right, there is a statutory framework that is mirrored in county ordinance. So there's sort of an essential core to it that is going to be the same no matter what county you're working with. There are certain components of the program that are mandatory. Yeah, and that is balanced with a certain degree of flexibility. And you will see that reflected in the language of statute where a county may allow this or may allow that. Again, the county has the option of including those optional provisions in their ordinances or not. So again, the land use program is a balance between maintaining a comprehensive statewide land use planning program and recognizing that there are regional differences throughout the state and that local jurisdictions are in the best position to create visions for their region and carry out those visions.
Okay, thank you. And then I have one last thing about agritourism. So I think where all this needs to start is define agritourism. There is no definition for it. And I feel like that's the start. And yeah, and the enforcement part of it, the counties cannot enforce agritourism. Our county here in Yamhill, he says there's no way he can go out there and really, because then they have to open up their books. Who's monitoring the 25%? So I almost, and Director Taylor, I would address this to you. I'd almost like to see ODA take a lead and do a survey and take the pulse of the farmers across the state and see, you know, kind of see what a survey looks like, and kind of take more of a holistic approach to the agritourism topic. So those are just my comments today. And I need to say that Jeff Stone is wrong. Land use definitely is a convoluted, more convoluted than water right now. So thank you very much for your presentation, Hillary.
Barbara, that's just fine. Jeff Stone is most often wrong, so we're okay. Well, if there's nobody else, no other questions, again, thank you, Vice Chair Harper, board members, Alexis, thank you for helping us prepare this and get ready. And anytime you have any questions, obviously Hillary is the expert, but when it comes to other policy issues, please stay in touch.
Hey, Director Rue, Hillary, thank you so much for joining us. I just wanted to pass along the apologies of our current board chair, Chair Halleck, who really was looking forward to this discussion and had a conflict that arose that she couldn't join. I'm sure she will go back and listen to your presentation, and we may follow up with some additional questions that she might have, because I know she was really interested here. But just thank you for coming and presenting to the board, bringing all this great information, because obviously, as you've seen, the board has a lot of resolutions around land use. It has been a long held priority topic for them. And so just getting the lay of the land has been very useful for us. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And please give my best to Chair Halleck. For those of you who may not know, and I'm sure there are very few of you who don't know this, but Stephanie Halleck's dad was the co-sponsor of SB 100, which created the land use system. Now, as Jim Johnson pointed out, it'll be 50 years, May of 23. So we're 2 years shy of our 50th. The other co-sponsor was a former chair of LCDC, that is the father. Hector McPherson was the dad of Greg McPherson, who was our chair for a number of years, and it's too bad they couldn't have been chairs at the same time. I've also often thought that the name of this building that I'm standing in, that you all might be back in someday, ought to be known as the Halleck McPherson Building, in honor of two real giants in Oregon history. And with that, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Well, it's time for board business now. And I guess we're going to be moving on to the ODA program area reports.
So just for Randy and Chad, we submit that written report from all the various program areas ahead of the board meeting. And this is just an opportunity if board members have any questions about those. We don't come up necessarily and present on them, but just an opportunity to ask questions about what you read. And we'll have the program directors usually come in if there are specific questions for them.
If Stephanie were here, she'd definitely want to make sure that y'all better be reading those reports. It's very important to her that everybody sees them. Well, not hearing any questions or comments, I will move on to the OWEB report.
Hi there. So we had our meeting March, I think it was 8th and 9th. I was still in a little bit of a fog, so I don't really have a big report for you today. But we did have Director Richard Whitman give us a presentation on the Klamath Falls dam removal. And he's been with this project, this process for 20 years, and he got it into a 15-minute presentation. It was extremely impressive. It's a huge project. I was really blown away by what they're about to do down there with the dam removals. So we approved additional funding for that if needed. And then we did approve some SIA, strategic implementation area funding for technical assistance, some stakeholder engagements and monitoring funding. We also approved a climate change consideration in our grant making process. So we approved staff outreach to the grantees and partners about efforts to be more fully address climate considerations across all of our grant programs. So that was a neat discussion to have and what that looks like. And that's about all I have right now. I'll do better next time, I promise. I'm learning a new gate on this farm, so I'll get there.
Barbara, could you, if you remember, is this also the meeting that OWEB approved the noxious weed grants?
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Yeah, that was a big discussion and a lot of public input on that topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the new board members, a lot of the noxious weed work that we do in Oregon, that funding comes via OWEB, which we then do a grant process to the locals and to counties for the on-the-ground work for priority projects. And last year, those were curtailed back because of uncertainty around lottery funds. And so this year, OWEB approved those with a slight increase in funding, which we really appreciated at ODA. And then on the other thing I just wanted to mention, since Barbara mentioned the kind of climate change lens on grants, we're also deploying those on the grant that we approve at ODA. So the noxious weed, those county weed grants that I just mentioned that come funding via OWEB, we've asked that grant program to put on a climate change lens, which is very easy for all noxious weed grants, right? As you can imagine, there's a climate change connection. We also have that as one of our kind of priority lenses when we do things like specialty crop block grant, et cetera. And that's been, that was the direction that came down from the governor from her executive order 2004 on climate change.
Right on, thank you. That's all I got, Brian.
Excellent. Thank you, Barbara. Resolutions. Work Group B got together last night to discuss a couple of resolutions there. 314 was, had quite a bit of attention. And I guess, Josh, you were going to speak on behalf of I guess you and Stephanie last night, huh? Awesome. All right. I'll give you the floor.
For those of you who don't know me, I was having some technical difficulties. I'm Josh Zielinski of Alpha Nursery. I'm a pretty new board member. Last night, or yesterday evening, I was in Work Group B's discussion, kind of wrapping things up on Resolution 266, which deals with collective bargaining for agricultural workers and employers, and Resolution 314, which we've heard a lot about today, the permitted uses on land zoned EFU and on high value farmland. We met prior, it seems like forever ago, but I think it was only about a couple months ago, or a month and a half. Spring is like really short and also really, really long for me. We're in the middle of kind of our big harvest season here at the nursery. But Shantae was there. I can't remember who else was there. Other members were in attendance there. And that's where we really kind of discussed and got into the weeds of both of these resolutions. you've got before you the red line versions of both of them. I don't know if you want me to just push them both forward at the same time or one at a time, but I guess we could start with Resolution 266. This isn't something that came about due to any board recommendations or any particular department, or person in the Department of Ag. Both of these are just up for a regular review, which really kind of clears up a lot of things for me, because I really didn't understand the process and why are we talking about these right now. Collective bargaining, Resolution 266, we've made a couple of small changes. Both Stephanie and I recommend that the board approve the red line version. Really all that's added is something that I think Shantae actually thought was very important regarding secret ballots. It was also in the comments on that from the Farm Bureau as something that they would want it to be sort of at least mentioned in the resolution. So we're recommending that the board approves that as it's now edited. And
so Josh, are you making a motion?
I am making a motion. I didn't know if that was my job. Yeah. On behalf of Stephanie and I and the others.
I'll second.
All right. I guess I'll butt in there since we have a motion by Josh, and then I think Barbara or Elin, one of the two, seconded. Is there any discussion on Resolution 266? I guess hearing none, all those in favor of approving the Resolution 266 as revised or updated, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Motion passes. So, all right, Josh, give you back the floor.
All right, so that was 266, and now we're on to the soup of the day here. Resolution 314, which deals with land use. Stephanie's got some notes here, and I think it's important to bring them up. You probably have them in front of you, but basically this resolution has been around since in many different forms since 2010. The last review that has been made, just like this one probably, I don't know what brought it up then, but it was probably just on its cycle through reviewing, which is what we do here, was 2017, so it's been a few years. Again, nothing in particular is pushing this forward. It's just on its cycle of its turn to be reviewed. In looking at it, it's got some the red line, the former version, or the current version, sorry, the 2017 version has some kind of outdated references. It brings up some 2013 legislative studies that I don't even think happened. It needed to be kind of, Chair Halleck's kind of one of her main goals anyway is to just kind of clean things up, update them in terms of clarifications where needed. This looks, the red line version, which both Stephanie and I are recommending that the board consider or approve, is it looks a lot different than than what we started with, the 2017 version, but the content really just, if you look at it, it looks really different, and this is such a hotbed issue that even I was kind of like, well, I got to make sure we're not upping the stakes here in any way, or I don't want to change anything too substantially, given that this wasn't brought forward to do that. It was really just brought forward to look at the resolution itself. Obviously, agritourism is a hotbed issue that we've covered in another resolution, and so that's leave that over there for now. But what we really wanted to do was just clarify some things, take into account some of the comments and whatnot that have been brought up. And what we're left is the red line version, which you have in front of you. And again, we're recommending that the board approve this as it's written. So I'm making a motion for the board to approve the red line version of resolution 314 as written.
So this is Shantae, Shantae Johnson for the record. I'm sorry that I couldn't be there yesterday when we were discussing more around these resolutions. But yesterday I received a phone call from Samantha Bear from Oregon Farm Bureau.
Hold on, before we open for discussion, we actually need a second since we have a motion on
Oh,
the table.
I'm sorry.
I second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. We'll move to discussion now. Go ahead, Shantae.
Sorry about that. I jumped the gun a little bit. I just wanted to, okay. So I received a phone call from Samantha Bear at Oregon Farm Bureau in regards to the 314 resolution and wanting to make sure that the board knew that they have members on both sides of the fence when it comes to this land use resolution. And because of COVID, it's been really hard for them to be able to meet and to have like constructive conversations around it, and that they wanted to meet in person, that there's no formal policy that they have within Oregon Farm Bureau that discusses the land use specifically, but that they have hopes to meet in person and to make some recommendations in regards to the resolution in the future. And so their recommendation was to hold off on approving this resolution. So I just wanted to bring that to the board, just to share that information.
So just real quick, okay. Go ahead, Elin.
Go ahead, Josh. Go ahead, Josh.
Okay. Real quickly, we addressed this yesterday, Chair Halleck and I, and other, Jim Johnson was there, other folks from Work Group B. And I think it's really important to note that nothing is fundamentally changing in the resolution other than, it's just basically wording, and I don't see how neither of us, there was discussion that maybe we should postpone this, so that different people could get together and talk about it, including the Farm Bureau. And I think a lot of members may have gotten calls from them asking the same. But I think it's important to note that it's rewording, it's clarifying. There isn't a lot of, some of the background stuff is, a little bit more clarified and brought up to date. But there really isn't a lot that's, the resolution itself says the same thing. So I don't know why we should wait and leave the 2017 version hanging around longer. That was where Stephanie and I left off. Now that's up to, it's up to the entire board where you fall on that, but that's kind of where we were at. Elin?
Yeah, Elaine Miller for the record. Anyway, Josh, I really appreciate you and Stephanie, obviously her long history with this issue, and this might come as a surprise to folks. Given the fact that I was on the American Farm Land Trust Board, was head of the Williamson Act in California and ag land conservation, and advocated for the first funding in Congress for farmland protection nationally. But as I looked at this, I actually have some problems with the underlying 2017 position. And Jim, thanks for taking time with me yesterday to kind of try to explain some things to me. And I think I maybe just need a little bit more time. Certainly bullet number 3 in the resolution, examination of the need to better define what certain non-farmland uses include, is absolutely necessary, absolutely needs to be done. No question about that. But where I take some pause is number 1, and talking about a examination with reducing the permitted requirements or permitted uses, and determining what land should be permitted outright. At least in what I've been able to gather over a short amount of time, there are very few uses that are actually permitted outright in the EFU, and most of those permitted uses are subject to very specific criteria that require land use review permitting, and a process that takes at least 6 months and costs thousands of dollars, plus the legal in fees, plus obviously legal costs too. So from coming from the wine industry, for a winery, we have to show that there's at least 15 acres on site of planted grapes, and that the business plan complies with various limits on visitor activities, et cetera, et cetera. And it would be a re-examination of those things. And I guess that just causes me some pause. And I question, and definitely we want to get at things that are a problem and a real issue, but that full re-examination just seemed like overplay. So I'm not, I appreciate the transparency and the articulation and the new amendments, but it actually shed light for me to say, ooh, maybe even in 2017, we need to think about this a little bit more on some of the suggestions in the resolution. So I would have trouble voting in favor of this, and I really, especially given what Farm Bureau said, I'd love to see if we could just delay, kind of hear what they've got to say, because they are a very broad organization, and I think there's lots of different sides to this story. So I would not want to move forward.
So Barbara Boyer, so just for some of the newer board members, we can always bring a resolution back at any time for review. This is not like a one and done for 2 years. So keep that in mind when we move forward with resolutions.
Is there any more discussion, or I would kind of maybe we could give Jim just a minute to elaborate a little bit more. He and Stephanie basically really worked on the rewrite version. So, I mean, if you have any thoughts to share that might help some of the board members, as you discussed with Elin, but maybe just a quick nutshell. I know you can go on forever about this stuff. So
yeah, you've already learned that. Yeah. You know, the summary or the sum up that you did, Josh, is right on. I mean, this doesn't change a lot of things, and it's really kind of gets in line with what we've been doing for the last several years, and that's trying to make our resolutions read better, be more transparent, and the like. In terms of policy, it doesn't change a thing. Elin, on that first element that you talk about, I think this gets to the broader issue of the exclusive farm use zone is getting so complicated that there needs to be a re-examination of just what it means. And when you look at uses that are permitted outright versus those that are subject to review, it's really much more a term of science than it is removing or adding uses. It gets to the point that as the EFU zone is structured, there's two sets of uses, 215.283 sub 1 and 215.283 sub 2, and I'm getting wonky here. But those first set of uses are supposed to be the uses that are really specifically related to farm use and shouldn't be subject to the same kind of review. The second set of uses are supposed to be those that really have compatibility issues and the like, and should go through a much more intensive type of review. Over time, that first set of uses, there have been a lot of uses plugged into there that have no nexus to farm use whatsoever.
And it's not necessarily that the fact that they would be removed from the EFU zone, but that they may need to be moved over into the sub 2 category. That's the real issue here. Whether or not specific land uses would be removed, I would be naive to think that certain uses would be removed, because it's just really hard to go back once something's been added. But that doesn't mean that there aren't issues in terms of how it coexists with agriculture, for example. And I would take energy facility siting as a great example. It's a sub 1 use. It's technically permitted outright, subject to state law only. And that's a real hot topic right now.
Thanks, Jim.
All right, any further discussion, Barbara?
So Barbara Boyer, just one last comment. So I feel like if we move this forward, maybe that group would get together sooner than later. Is kind of what I was thinking. If we move this forward, there may be movement in that arena with the Farm Bureau.
All right. Well, any further discussion? Okay, well, seeing none, all those in favor of, I guess, approving the revision of 314, as we just read, say aye.
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 Okay. And all opposed, same sign.
Nay.
Nay.
Okay. Is this a majority vote, or is it, if there's any? Okay.
Majority.
Okay, well, it sounds like majority voted it through,
Okay.
but yeah, okay, so motion passes. All right, that's it for resolutions. We're moving on to the nominating committee. So Tyson, you're up.
Yeah, Tyson Raymond for the record. The nominating committee has met over the last few months and discussed what the next slate of, what our next chair and vice chair is going to look like. And we would nominate Brian Harper to be the next chair and Luisa Santamaria to be the next vice chair.
All right. Excellent. Okay.
So we need a motion to approve that recommendation.
Yeah.
I move to approve the recommendation.
I second.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? No, I'll accept it. And well, I guess no further discussion. All those in favor of, I guess, starting September, but I think we're moving to December. Is that what it is? Brian Harper's chair and Luisa Santamaria as vice chair. Say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. All right, not on that one. All right, motion passes. Cool. All right, moving on to newsletter topics.
Thank you.
I think we should definitely have something on our newest board members, for sure.
Well, and I think our two panels were pretty amazing today. They were very educational, and I think especially some of the conversions of non-farm dwellings, I think that it would be important for the legislators to kind of see maybe some of those graphs from that we saw today. And then the water panel was amazing also, the water planning.
I was wondering, what about the hemp topic that came up? That seemed pretty hot. I don't know if that's very important, at least newsletter worthy, but it was a big deal.
Yeah, Brian, I actually, so Elin and I had talked earlier was it this week or last week? I can't remember, right? Someone said time has no meaning.
Yeah, it's a blur. I don't know either.
But I do want to bring, she had an interest and I agreed to bring a hemp presentation to the board to get a sense of where that is in the state from a regulations perspective, from the USDA's hemp plan perspective, from some of the challenges that we're seeing, particularly in Southern Oregon right now. And so I think we've put that on the list for a future board meeting. And I think we can make mention. Maybe if we wanted to do a legislative update blurb in the newsletter, and we can make mention of it. But we will be bringing that back to the board for a more in-depth conversation.
Excellent. Yeah, it sounds good. Good to have an update. It's been a few years. All right. Any other ideas for the newsletter topics?
Do we want to celebrate the addition in funding for the specialty block grant at all? And then maybe just mention American Rescue Plan. I think there is, funding. I know there maybe just a small blurb of what you had mentioned, Director Alexis, about what some of the process may look like. I think folks might be interested in that.
Yeah, sounds good. Any other ideas come to mind?
What about the meeting that is continue being virtual for the Oregon Department, the Board of Agriculture? When are we hoping to have a in-person meeting? I don't know. This year, is it still virtual?
So I think to be determined. So obviously guidance is changing quickly as the CDC updates their guidance, as the state and OHA revise our state guidance based upon that. Right now, I mentioned Lisa Hansen is in that reopening state government work group. And so we'll follow that direction from the larger state perspective. I would say when we have direction that we can meet in person again, we will do so. Hopefully that will be for the September board meeting, but I think right now I can't say that because we haven't gotten that updated guidance. I think one of the important things that we need to make sure we can do is have a large enough meeting space where the public can actually access the board meeting. And so restrictions on meeting space and the size of meetings is going to be really important, because I don't think we could just have a meeting where the board comes together, but we're restricting public access because of size requirements. So I think how some of that shakes out is still yet to be determined, but if that guidance comes out and we're able to bring the board together in September, we want to do so. But we're really waiting on that larger guidance from the state. And I do think also we'll probably be in a virtual, like a hybrid model as well, right? Like, how do we still allow others to participate, to come and give public comment if we're out in an area and they aren't able to travel? If a board member isn't able to travel for a particular meeting, how can we still use technology to allow them to participate, whether the public or board members? And I think we still have to work through some of that, but I think that'll be the expectation going forward as well.
Okay, thanks. Maybe just a little update about that. Maybe people will be interested, the public, I don't know. Just a thought. We still have COVID around.
Awesome. All right. Well, it sounds like that's, Carla?
I just wanted to mention that thank you for your patience, but we have published the 21 Board of Ag report. So I will send a copy out to each of you. It is published on our Board of Ag webpage already, and we're working to get it distributed to the legislature. So that's now available, and I will send a copy out after the meeting.
Great. All right. Well, let's say we're done with board business. Next meeting is September 14th through 15th. Hopefully we can meet in person. but I guess we'll find out, to be determined. I guess from there, meeting's adjourned.
Thank you, Brian.
You're welcome.
Yes, good job, Brian. Thank
Thanks.
you.
Try run.
Bye.
Bye.